Everybody take your seats and fucking strap in because we got a doozy today.
Yeah, it's too bad that Da Vinci didn't create a bell that we could have played. He created everything else, it feels like.
He might have. Did you go through the entire codices?
No.
Okay.
I went through a lot of what they did. I didn't go through all the pages because Leonardo da Vinci put out so many pages and pages of just anything that you can think of. This man studied everything. The word that kept popping up was polymath.
Yes.
I didn't know what in the hell a polymath was. I didn't know if he just knew all the different kinds of mathematics that there were. But it just means a guy that knows a little bit about everything, but also...
So poly is just multiple because it's polytheistic, things like polyamory.
Yep.
So, and when you hear someone mention the term Renaissance man, this is the guy you need to picture in your head.
Who's the guy in the movie?
The movie Renaissance Man?
Wasn't there a Renaissance Man movie? I'm thinking Bicentennial Man.
You're thinking the Robin Williams classic robot to human being Bicentennial Man.
That's right. Okay. Yeah. My bad.
I mean, maybe some inspiration from Da Vinci. Who knows?
Da Vinci inspired so many different people. He was kind of your artist's favorite artist during this Renaissance period moving forward. I wouldn't say created techniques of painting, but influenced so many people around him to the point to where this Renaissance that was happening, we talk about the Renaissance as if it was something that happened all over the world.
Can you say Renaissance?
We talked about it kind of missing Russia and Peter the Great having to go out and pull the Renaissance and everything in the Enlightenment into Russia.
We talked about it. It's been mentioned just in kind of trying to also compare like a scope of time.
Yeah.
I think we mentioned it maybe during the Maya or the Aztecs because as certain things were going on with them, you literally had this shit going on over in Italy. And I think we mentioned it during the Columbus one because they kind of take place at the same time.
Scotland and all that, but what we talk about so much is so Eurocentric because these are the history makers. The Renaissance happening within Europe and everywhere around there, a lot of this shit was already figured out in Asia. The Muslim states had already kind of figured out these different sort of artistic things. So when we say the Renaissance, this isn't a world's revolution. This is just Europe kind of trying to catch up to everybody else.
And everyone kind of went through their own at a sept time.
Yeah. Well, just as information spreads.
Yeah, exactly. When those big influxes of just different fields of thinking. Kind of going back to what you were saying, being a polymath. I mean, how many people do you think Leonardo was just a painter?
Probably a good portion of people.
50 plus.
Yeah.
%. And then maybe another 30 to 40% being like, oh, well, he also do some inventing too. He was also kind of an inventor. You'd be like, okay.
Code maker.
Yeah. When you break it down, painter, engineer, scientist, theorist, sculptor, architect, the fields in which he was, I'll just even name a few: anatomy, astronomy, botany, cartography, paleontology, military engineering, chemistry, hydrodynamics, physics. He, again, the Renaissance man that not only just kind of dipped his toe into these fields, but actually made pretty significant either discoveries or observations in these fields that someone that just is dabbling in really couldn't do. Like, he studied all of this shit.
Yeah, and it wasn't like there were big institutions of learning for these things. This was him just reaching out and figuring a lot of this stuff out on his own.
What do they call it? He wasn't a lettered gentleman or wasn't a lettered man. That's what they considered someone that had like the formal type of education. But for a guy that got just kind of the bare bones education that would be afforded to him based on his, not really lineage, but just essentially from some connections that he had, primarily self-educated. And especially in all the stuff that he is famous for.
Part of the reason why, and we'll talk about it during the episode, part of the reason why I think a lot of this stuff wasn't more widely known is Latin was the language of the time. That was the educational language that was being spoken in a lot of these places.
This would also probably signified your higher standing in society.
He never was taught Latin because of his bastardized upbringing. He wasn't allowed to be taught Latin. He will try to learn it later on in life, but everything that he did was outside of kind of this general intelligence based language, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
He wasn't speaking the same language as all the other.
He wasn't in the club.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
All right, guys. Well, we are going to dive into it right now. But first, remember, wherever you listen to your podcast, it's not asking a lot. It's a little click for you guys on that 5 stars, but it does more than you can think of for us when it comes to those ratings and reviews. So please do that. Got anything?
Nah, let's jump into Da Vinci.
All right. All right, I got to break down the name here because Da Vinci didn't even enter my mind that was just simply the moniker of where you were.
From Vinci.
So basically, Leonardo da Vinci is Leonardo from Vinci.
Yeah, well, Leonardo de Ser Piero da Vinci.
Which, if you break out, it's Leonardo, son of Piero, born in Vinci.
Just very literal with this name.
Yeah, I mean, when you introduced yourself to somebody by this name, they already knew 2 very, big facts about you.
Yeah, and his last name kind of becomes interesting because, I'm not gonna lie to you, my whole entire existence, I thought Da Vinci was just his last name.
So did I.
Didn't realize that he was just from an area called Vinci. The reason that he doesn't have a last name besides from Vinci, he was born April 15th, 1452. Gonna call bullshit on that date probably because again in 1452 I don't know how well the dates were being kept. It could have been around that time, but
I think maybe the fact of who he was born to,
possible. Okay,
being and the term that they notary and what it's compared to now is just so wildly different. Like, I'm a notary. I would not have been a notary back then.
you're a notary?
Yeah.
Really?
Oh yeah.
You got a stamp and everything?
Oh yeah.
Oh my god, I didn't know that.
El notario.
He was born around the Tuscan village of Vinci, or Vinci. I'm just going to go with Vinci because I'm a dirty American. It's 20 miles outside of Florence. His father, as Chris pointed out, was a legal notary. His name, from the Ser Piero, his name was Piero, where is it? Ser Piero da Vinci de Antonio de Ser de Piero da Vinci. I don't know why we got to keep going through this. I don't know why it matters that he was from Vinci as well. But De Antonio, I believe, was his last name.
That was his dad.
Yeah.
Antonio was his dad. So basically his name again was Ser Piero, son of Antonio from Vinci.
God damn it. His father had a bit of a wandering eye. He ended up having Leonardo out of wedlock with potentially, from what I saw, it sounds like she was a servant. Her name is Katerina.
She belonged to somebody else, which is why it was such a taboo, because it's like, you can't bang my property.
Okay.
And so it came, it caused a little bit of an issue. Going back to his father being a legal notary at that time was just basically their way of saying kind of a lawyer, right? Someone that's versed in the law, in the same way of, like, you have trial lawyers. So not every lawyer is in the courtroom. And then you have lawyers that can simply just be reviewing contracts or doing negotiations and things like that. I think that's more akin to what a legal notary was more of that administrative lawyer side, but you still did have to have a certain pedigree because that was only for learned individuals.
Well, and that pedigree was also passed down usually from generation to generation. Yeah. And we find that there was a barrier because Leonardo was a bastard. He was born out of wedlock. It would preclude him from any kind of traditional schooling that would provide as far as going into the notary business. This is a lot like Dale Doback and trying to get into the family business of being a doctor.
But you're a medical doctor.
It's all about who you know.
Yeah.
But this non-traditional school or this traditional schooling that he wasn't allowed to have is where Latin would have been taught. His childhood is a little bit mysterious. but it was most likely involved with being raised by his father's parents, so his grandparents.
Yeah, he spent a lot of time I think from the age of, starting from like the age of 5, he actually lived in Antonio, who was his grandfather, on paternal grandfather. He lived in Antonio's home and he was close to his uncle, Francesco, probably Da Vinci, maybe.
There's going to be so many names in this where the fingers come together.
I had to refrain because my hands are full right now.
This is just how we're going to start out with this guy, because I find it so funny that his first written memory that he writes down is of a kite that was flying into his cradle and his mouth was opened by the tail of the kite. I don't know what the hell that means.
Does it mean kite as in bird or kite as in actual kite?
I'm going to say kite. I think they had kites back then. At the age of 14, his dad's connections finally pulled through. He couldn't get him into the traditional schooling, but at least his father had some connections inside of Tuscany, or inside of Florence.
Firenze.
He would end up becoming what was known as a studio boy.
A garzone.
Is that what?
Yeah, Garzone. And I assume the N-A, so garzone, which, yeah, studio boy.
For this very famous guy whose name was Andrea del Verrocchio, inside of his workshop. Verrocchio was looked upon pretty high just by this local ruling family that was known as the Medici family.
Do you know who his master was?
I feel
Verrocchio's master was the sculptor Donatello, whose actual name... So we've already got 2 Ninja Turtles out of the way at this point. Donatello's real name, Donato di Niccolo di Beto Bardi.
Donatello feels like the right thing to do there.
If you're, you know what? How many times do you think he had to sign his artwork?
Oh yeah.
At the bottom, he's like, my fucking arm. He's like, I'm shortening this. Donatello works. But when Donatello died, that's when Verrocchio became the master essentially and had his own studio, and then that's when he brought on Leonardo.
And Verrocchio was very famous in his own right. This whole idea of these workshops, just seeing kind of you don't want to say that a documentary nowadays would show the workshop very accurately, but kind of the portrayals really, to me, kind of get the blood pumping, because you'll see a shot of somebody that's carving something out of granite. You will see metallurgy going on where they're melting down tin or they're melting down copper to pour. There's so many different things that went on.
It was called it's not a bodega, but the name comes from bodega because bodega means shop.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to remember what it was actually called, but it's something close to bodega. I'm going to look it up.
Okay.
But that's essentially what the shops were called. But yeah, that's got to be crazy. Like you're saying, you just walk in and the expectation is, do you see like a silent studio where people are painting bowls of fruit and doing that kind of stuff? No, it's probably in one side. It sounds like a construction yard. Probably you hear the chiseling of like the stone and all that kind of stuff. In another area, you have smelting going on for metals. And then in another area, you've got, them working with clay and sculptures, things like that. So these were kind of like one-stop shops for all your artistic needs.
You got to think that the paintings have to be in a separate area because of just all the dust that's flying around this place. The dust, the smoke, everything else that can affect these paintings. This Medici family that kind of ruled in the area was pretty fair as far as Verrocchio kind of watching out for him. They would be somebody who sort of, I wouldn't say shepherded Leonardo along, but at the same time, they kind of kept an eye out because he was one of Verrocchio's boys. Lorenzo Medici would commission Verrocchio to do a lot of these bronze sculptures.
Bottega. B-O-T-T-E-G-A. Bottega.
Ooh. Okay.
And then that goes into bodega.
These bronze sculptures that he would do included a statue of David that was said to be modeled after the young apprentice Da Vinci. Mm-hmm. So Verrocchio used him as a muse for a statue of David that's standing over Goliath's skull.
It did come up that he was a fucking handsome dude.
Yeah. I don't see why not.
Which, if you're going to be doing some of the stuff he's going to be doing at the time, we look back on this now, and of course you look back with hindsight and you say, This stuff is fucking incredible that he did. And even nowadays, for one person to do all that he did, there's not a comparison to it. It doesn't exist now.
No.
But looking back during these times, because he was a pioneer in a lot of these things, he probably came across pretty fucking weird to some people, especially when it came to certain studies that he performed.
Oh, later on, yes, very weird and very sacrilegious while doing so many religious works.
Yeah, so Verrocchio actually did a statue of David. The more famous statue of David was done by Michelangelo, which the guy sounds like a fucking dick.
We get some crossover.
I know exactly. And the more famous one is the one carved out of granite or marble or whatever it is. I didn't even know there was a second statue of David. But this one actually there's a little more going on to it. And I think isn't it supposed to be a little more, I'm doing historical in quotes here, because is it biblically accurate? Because wasn't David like 13 or 14?
Yeah, and Goliath's head is sitting between his legs.
Yeah.
So this is after David slew Goliath or slain Goliath.
I didn't know, weirdly enough, that the statue of David, that's who that was portraying.
I just found it out as you said it.
Okay.
I had no idea that was the same guy. I thought David was just some hot stud back then before too.
Which makes sense, because if you think about it, what did the Greeks make statues of? It was the gods, because they had multiple gods, jacked fucking dudes.
That's probably why his dick's so small, is because he had sports dick after he fought Goliath, so it sucked into his body. Mm-hmm. That makes more sense.
Renaissance, you're really only making these commissioned statues if they have some type of religious significance, especially in fucking Italy, because you've got the Catholic Church running the show.
Yeah. His official apprenticeship wouldn't start, so he graduates from studio boy into full-blown apprentice at the age of 17. This would last for 7 years. During his training, we're just going to hit the long list here because he learned so much from Verrocchio's studio.
Going to be a long episode, guys, just so you know.
Probably, yeah. His training involved casting, metalwork, leatherwork, mechanics, woodwork, drawing, painting, sculpting, and modeling. So any kind of artistic ability he was getting pushed into.
He was walking into every department, and then every so often he would have to stop in the middle, pose for something, and be like, you guys got it? All right. And then just keep going about his studies. But yeah, man, an apprentice for 7 years. So 14, he's studio boy. At 17, that's when he gets made apprentice and is training for 7 years. And one of the coolest things, and after doing this kind of stuff and we get more immersed in his art and actually looking at it.
Yeah.
When you think of the Mona Lisa, you just see her, right? Like in your head. And in a weird way, I always see her, but I don't see the whole scope of the painting. I always felt like seeing it in my head. She's from like the shoulders up. She's not. Like, it's a pretty sizable, she's sitting, you can see her hands and everything kind of down below resting on her lap.
Yeah, there's a wink of cleavage in there.
Once you actually look at the background and the detail in the background, that almost completely for me flips it to a new level of impressiveness, because you're just like, oh shit. Like, it's not just her. Like, every meticulous aspect of this painting has been like thought out.
Well, I'm going to butcher this because it's not in front of me to sound out, but he kind of creates this technique called soffetto, and it's sort of like trying to smoke features. There's no defined lines in what he does.
It's what you would consider like a seamless transition.
There's no definitive in what he does, and he's good. Pre-apologies for this episode. It's should be the most visual episode that we've ever done. Mm-hmm. Chris and I have pictures. Our projector took a dump right
which
before
wouldn't
the
have helped
episode.
you guys anyway, but
yeah. So we're going to make references to this kind of stuff. We'll talk about it back and forth. If you want to look at it, we're going to say the names of these things so you can go back and take a look at it.
Real quick before we go into the first one, the drapery study.
Oh,
that they were forced to do. So Verrocchio, one of his big things, and if you go back and look at some Renaissance art, you'll notice that, I mean, some of these are photo quality, man. It's so crazy when you see some of them. But the drapery study was the study of essentially the way that a drape or an upholsterer clothing would fall upon the body, but how it would also, when it's laying, it's got not crinkles, what's the term? But yeah, like little peaks and valleys
Rolls.
and then
Yeah.
rolls and everything within it, and it flows, especially clothes back then that they were wearing that were like loose fitting robes. So what Verrocchio would do is he would take like a clay form and just kind of form it into just like a random shape or something. He would then take a piece of like drapery, dip it in plaster, and while it was still wet, he would then go ahead and drape it over this clay form. And however it fell over, it would have, different folds and lines and stuff like that in it. He would then get different sources of light and shade this thing from different angles. Because when you're creating a painting on a 2D surface, I think this kind of maybe gets lost for some people. When you take a picture, the reason you can tell a picture is 3D is because of the angle, the shading, things like that you can see aren't as in focus as others, so they're further away from the camera. Your mind just pieces together, oh, I can tell all three dimensions of this photo.
There's depth.
Yes. When you're doing a painting or a piece of art, depth is all because you're on a 2D surface. Depth is all determined by essentially the shading and the way that colors transition and then lines form. So by doing these drapery studies, and you look them up, put Da Vinci or Verrocchio drapery study, and you'll see essentially like how good these people are and how good Leonardo becomes at basically that's why I think it's so underrated. Is it so good? Your mind is so used to seeing it and it looks so natural that you don't even piece together like a hand fucking did that.
Yeah. Well, and it's also hard to just look at something like that. And there's certain paintings that you look at, you just know we're getting half of a face. We're going to get all of their discerning features, but at the same time, there's going to be no shade under the nose to kind of give that a little bit of a pulling out towards your eye look.
That's why certain paintings you'll look at and it'll almost look like, you're like, why do their faces look weird? And it's because they're trying to capture certain aspects of their face without putting shading in a 2D way. So it's off. But where you can start darkening areas and where you can start shading places and know how the light is hitting something from multiple angles, it opens up this entirely, and it's not brand new at this time and everything, but it's starting to be refined and crafted at this point of making in a lot of ways more photorealistic like art.
So I would almost say that to this area, it is something new because the medium that they were using for paint back then was called tempera. And tempera is essentially, you would have, why am I forgetting the word? The powders that they would use, pigments. You would have, basically pigments that are ground very, very fine into a powder. Then you would mix them for tempera with an egg yolk. The egg yolk doesn't make it translucent, and so it's just a very flat image. No matter how many times or how many layers of paint you put on it, it's always going to be flat because there's just something solid in there of the yolk stopping the light from traveling through.
Yeah.
There was this idea coming down from Flanders, which is in, I believe, Dutch.
How did that not degrade? It's a biodegradable substance was the yolk the main ingredient?
Yeah,
in
it just dries. You don't usually see yolk that dries.
No. I get that. I was wondering when you were going to kind of talk about this is when you're talking about some of these paintings that they're going to be doing that Leonardo does that are 25 feet wide, 12 feet tall and everything. When you see pictures of them, did you know what the size of the Last Supper was before we'd start looking into this?
I knew it was huge. I didn't know it took up an entire wall, basically.
I had no idea that it was that big. Can you imagine the texture on those because of the painting style and how much paint that they were having to put on those and the thickness of it?
We'll talk about it when we get to the Last Supper because the Last Supper had to be cleaned up after Da Vinci had finished it up pretty quick because of the choices that he had made with his paint. Back in the day, those were just made as like frescoes. And again, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, but the frescoes were basically just white plaster that was put down, and then you would just layer your paint on top of it. Whereas Da Vinci looked at it and he plastered everything and let it dry, but then he would use tempera and he would use oil-based paints, which is what we're getting into that was coming from Flanders, to try to create this depth. But the bad thing about it was it would degrade so fast because you would have air and moisture and everything getting into it that, like, I think it was like 5 years after, they're like, well, this is falling apart. We have to go through and clean this up.
Also, when you look at some of these pictures, the color selection isn't vast, but there are certain paintings that will provide distinctive colors, things that pop, but a lot of the backgrounds are more of your earth tones, things like that. But you're still limited to trying to create anything that you can. Like, it's not fucking Home Depot. You don't get to walk into an art store and being like, I want these shades and I want stuff I can mix together and I want all this. I want to be able to make every color under the sun. This is at a time when the color selection that's available is just what is available to be made out of what, like flower pigments and dyes. Like, there's not like artificially created coloring or dyes at this point. It all has to come from something naturally processed, right?
Well, there's certain shades that they can get because you have your three primary colors. You have red, blue, and yellow. God, I hope that's right. I took a lot of art classes. Red, blue, and yellow are your primary colors. And then you can create shades of green out of these, blue and yellow together. You can create shades of purple with red and blue. And so if you are mixing your pigments correctly...
Orange, red, and yellow. Okay, yep. I think you're right with the primary colors.
Yeah, you can kind of start to blend these things to get them close.
But how do you get the primary colors is what I'm saying. How do you get blue?
Lapis lazuli was the mineral that we talked about in Afghanistan.
Okay.
That was ground down into a fine enough powder that then they could mix that in together. Red, I believe, was made from, not bronze. It was some kind of a mineral that would give you red. Bronze was used after it had turned green. Oxidized, yes. They would scrape the oxidation off of it to be able to make green. And these pigments and powders would then be mixed in with this oil. And the tricky thing about the oil is, since it's clear, when you lay down a layer of paint and then you lay another layer on top of it, when the light hits it, instead of the tempera being a solid base behind it, the light will actually start to reflect through these very thin, almost translucent colors. So it gives you depth as you build these things up further and further.
Which means that you have to account for that, which means you're drawing something or painting something in mind and being like, I know that I'm going to be putting another color on top of this, but it's going to make it a different color than those two because of the way it shines.
It's going to shade it darker. It's going to completely change the 3D, 2D kind of look, the depth of this painting. So they were using tempera. They were using watercolor. Watercolor, I mean, you've seen a grade school painting. It's just, it looks great.
My
but
house
at the same
is right with them right now.
And it's great that we talk about this, because the first thing that we're going to talk about is actually something that Da Vinci didn't do himself. It was called the Baptism of Christ, that was made in 1475.
Going to be a lot of church references in this when it comes to the art.
So this was actually commissioned for Verrocchio to do, and he drew a lot of kind of the main characters, but then he would allow the people inside of his studio, his artists that were working with him, to draw other points of this. Now, the main point of this whole thing in this picture, the baptism of Christ, obviously, is Christ being baptized. So Christ was done by Verrocchio, everything else was done. The part that was done by Da Vinci wasn't done in tempera. It was done in oil-based paints, and they were the two angel children that are sitting down to the left of Jesus. When Verrocchio saw how good of a job Da Vinci did, they said that that was the last time that he picked up a paintbrush. Verrocchio just basically quit because he saw how well Da Vinci could handle these oil-based paints to create the kind of depth and figures that he just couldn't do with tempera. He saw that there was this new technology that had come into the game. He saw that Da Vinci had such a good handle on it that he's like, this really isn't something that I can do anymore. And so anything that came out of the studio after that was usually done by Da Vinci or by somebody else that was using these oil-based paints.
One thing, too, that is, I think that Verrocchio mentioned, or of course, whoever was taking down this information, is the attention to detail within, like, the skin and the structure and everything. They said that when he was looking at it, the way that, like, the skin had even like maybe like a striation in it and everything, showing that it wasn't just, a flat surface, just the attention to detail that caught his eye, like you said, and the other way so much that he was just like, I think I'm done here.
Yeah,
I'm too old to. This is going to be the future of what art's going to be going forward, and it's coming out of my studio. So
the student has become the master at this point. So I can work on some other things.
That was, I think, the transition when he then, because it wasn't too much longer after that before he was essentially qualified. I think 1472, when he was 20 years old, he qualified as a master within like the Guild of Artists of St. Luke, is what they called it. And basically it was a guild that included both artists and then people that were like medical doctors.
Which makes sense because I think there's a lot of hospitals around the world that are St. Luke's, or at least around the country. Prior to that, he would attend this thing called the Platonic Academy of the Medici, where all of these great Florentine artists would basically meet and they would discuss the methods that they would use. And this sort of feels like the beginning of Da Vinci's scientific study of light and perspective that he was also getting with Verrocchio using the drapery. But at the same time, now he's hearing all of these other methods that are being used by all these other Florentine artists, to where he can kind of start to maybe feel out his own ways, learning these different types of studies of light and perspective. Just the way that this whole idea comes together, that he turns into his own artist, is in this sort of Eurocentric, this is how we're going to do it, but at the same time, it's also this new method of using oil-based paints that are coming in that sort of just changes the game for everything. And like I was talking about the oil-based paints, as soon as those layers are able to send this light through and you're able to get basically through 3, 4, 5 layers, it almost kind of can create its own shadowing, because you can lay lighter colors on top of it to where you can start to get fading in and out. It adds a lot of depth to it. Wow, I just lost my space.
You were geeking out on paint over there, buddy.
Yeah,
No, I got you.
My background with this, I mean, I'm not a painter. I can't draw well. My writing is god-awful. But at the same time, I think it was 8th and 9th grade, I took art classes. I had a shitty art teacher. Absolutely loved art. Couldn't draw anything like that. All through high school, we had ceramics.
Yeah.
And ceramics was a 1-semester class. I don't know if I've talked about it on here. There was 3 ceramics classes that you could take, ceramics 1, 2, and 3. Mm-hmm. I ended up taking through ceramics 6 because I would take it every single semester, to the point to where even after you could take AP ceramics, they just kept creating a curriculum that you could follow.
Oh, nice.
And I just loved it. I loved throwing things on the wheel. I was more of a hand builder kind of guy. Also, at the same time, I mean, you're throwing vases that can then put stems in so you can.
I was going to ask you if you ever tried to construct something like that.
Yeah.
I get what you're saying, but at the same time, I think you can appreciate the technical prowess it takes, not just to paint like this, but essentially he's making his own colors. Yeah. He's making the paint. He has to make the paint the right thickness. He has to make it the right, viscosity. Like, it's just him trying to kind of like piece together what's going to be his style, for however long he's going to be doing this.
In a medium that hadn't been established in Europe yet. Mm-hmm. Like, you're just using new methods to do the same thing, but at the same time, you can work your methods based upon something new in a completely different fashion.
So, qualifies as a master at 20 in 1473, so 21, he does this drawing of a place called the Arno Valley. And I think was Florence or Vinci in the Arno Valley. I can't remember which one it was.
I think it was Florence.
But this is one of the first, if not the first, actual like landscape portrait, which sounds completely crazy, because you're like, well, if you're thinking of art, one of the first things that you would want to go ahead and paint would be stuff that's outside. Well, it's not the case, because it has to be in such a controlled environment with access to the paints and the colors and certain things. That's where you're going to actually learn to do art. So you're doing things inside, your bowls of fruit, your statue, your models and things like that. Outside was something that was just like, it's not, everyone's not painting. It's not a hobby. Like some people are like, I
Yeah.
like to do, I like to draw ducks on the lake, and that's what I do. And some people are pretty fucking good at it. But this is at a time when the only people that were painting were people that were being paid to paint, and the people that were paying to paint were some of these, wealthy individuals, but a lot of the time it was being painted for the church.
Well, the other incredible thing about this too is nowadays you lay down a canvas, you draw your work on a canvas, right?
Yeah.
There were no canvases back then. These were just literally boards, just sheets of wood that they would lay down a white base color on, and then they would work their paints from that. A normal artist that was doing a portrait or anything like that, you would draw your portrait first, you would fill in your landscape afterwards because the landscape wasn't important.
People didn't want the landscape they were actually sitting in unless they're in their gilded room or whatever. But yeah, you'd be like, what do you want your back? Make me look like I'm looking over like a river, or I'm at the fucking beach or something like that.
So Da Vinci and a lot of Verrocchio's work would be the one that was painting in the landscapes back behind. So he would start to realize that, if you look at a rock formation, it's not going to kind of just be this blurred blob that you put in there. You're not just taking your brown and you're not just stabbing it on the easel in creating this background. If you look at a pile of rocks, you can kind of start to see the shapes and the accentuations, where the rocks split up, any sort of veins or anything like that. You don't have to draw those in specifically, but the more shading that you can put back there to show that there's depth within these rocks, it almost brings the main part of the portrait of the person up closer to where you can look at it and be like, oh, okay, so there's range behind them.
Yeah, you can tell. And I think the other thing too is, the human eye, when you're looking at something, especially people that are getting around just by fucking horse and whatever, you're seeing nature a lot. Your eye is able to catch the details. You know what a rock formation or a hill looks like when it's so far away from you. You know what details that you can see. If you're looking at a painting and it just looks like like you're saying, just kind of a bleh, not a lot of detail in it, regardless of how good the picture or how good the portrait is, that detracts from the overall painting itself. But when you look at it and you're like, that actually, okay, I'm not taken out. That could be a portrait because the background is so realistic. Everything is done realistically.
This is the version of the Sears family photos when you would go into the department store and they would just have like the pull down screens back behind.
It's the same screen that they pull down when you used to your school pictures.
Oh yeah.
Just the one with like the blue, and it was kind of a blue and gray and black gradient.
But then when it comes senior picture time, and
anything
you can
goes.
go out into the world, those senior pictures pop a lot harder than just the Sears specials. As you were talking about with this pen and ink drawing of the Arno Valley, this is, again, it's not a painting. This is just pen and ink. This is just the quill dipping into ink and kind of creating the outline of this thing.
It might have been, he also used charcoal. He was able to use like
Possibly,
charcoal too for like the shading areas and everything.
But that's where everybody gets their starts. And that's where a lot of, when you look into all of these journals that Da Vinci kept, there's a lot of what they called cartoons, almost pre-drawings to kind of get the forms of things out before he would go out and start doing these paintings. And it was basically like the conceptual stage of trying to draw the bones of something before you add in everything else.
I think of it in the way of like, I think we'll probably talk about this later, but when you're trying to draw a comic book character or like a superhero,
perfect.
You are basically what you're using is a series of circles and like cylinders almost, and maybe some like elongated like ovals. But what you're basically doing is you're just creating the structure, kind of like when you look at those Boston Dynamic robots. It's just, you look at it and you're like, oh, that's a humanoid and everything. You're giving yourself just the structure. And then off of that, then you start detailing in the musculature and the differences. And then as you do that, you can erase what the structure was, and that's what you have. That's what Da Vinci's doing here with this landscape, is he's basically creating, if you looked at it and looked at the landscape, you're like, I know what this is, but he's not getting the coloring or anything like that of it.
Well, you know what the important part of this sketch of the Arno Valley was?
He took into account something that like most people would fail to see, right?
it was a concept to try to connect Florence to the Mediterranean Sea.
Okay.
So he was using it as an outline to try to say, hey, we can dig this canal, bring Florence to the Mediterranean Sea via going into Pisa, the Leaning Tower area, and then we can take that down into the Ligurian Sea, which then connects to the Mediterranean.
Okay.
So this is like his early idea of canal building to try to make Florence connected to a seaport. So this isn't even just for art.
You could totally dig a canal.
Yeah.
It's right there.
This isn't even just for art. This is like, no. We're drawing blueprints now to say that this is possible to be able to do.
Well, 1476 rolls around. He's 24. He's a master. He's doing his thing. He's finding his own. And then he gets arrested along with 3 or 4 others. 3?
Yeah.
4 total.
One of them was a Medici family member.
Or someone very close to it. Someone in the Medici orbit that, okay, so what they get arrested for is they get arrested for sodomy, which, according to the church is a big no-no.
Poles and holes.
Yep. And, okay. And of course, at this point, it's going to go without saying. So Leonardo, I mean, his personal life, again, like Adam was saying, is very scarce because most of the stuff we know about Leonardo was documented down, and it was his notes and his drawings and things like that. So it's personally from him. Wasn't real big on the, Dear Diary and writing down all of the personal stuff. He did seem fairly openly gay.
Yeah.
And everything, as openly as he could be after, especially this incident. Word's going to get around. He was much more careful about it going forward at that point as far as visibility. But yeah, he enjoyed the company of dudes, and kind of also talking about this as far as some of the people he's going to kind of bring into his life and take on as both kind of a weird version of apprentice lover type situation. They're going to be some pretty young, like 15, I think, is when they kind of start the romantic side of the relationship or whatnot. Yeah, in the context of our time, you look back at that and you're like, come on, man, like 15. But at that point, it was 15 across the board for everybody.
Hey, Italy's right next to Greece. We know about what Greece did.
Exactly. And if we're going to sit here and say, well, Leonardo was a pedophile and all that stuff, he was living in a society where pedophilia was just essentially the norm at this point. So just addressing that out right now.
Like I told you, it's not very tough to tell that Leonardo was gay because his attention to detail was
also extremely fashionable.
Yes.
And it's like goes several times of mentioning like his favorite thing to wear was like pastel, like pink and everything. He had like really like meticulous robes and everything. Guy knew how to fucking dress, looking sharp.
And he also created a tank.
Yeah, exactly.
He's a very deep man.
Now this is something that could essentially maybe lead to death.
Oh yeah.
It was definitely something that would lead to imprisonment. And the reason that he ends up getting away with this is out of, again, the 3 other people, one of them has connections or is a Medici. So they really can't have this getting out. And the only way that they're able to confirm this happening is when you accuse somebody or when you would have to have someone to provide testimony. That person would have to be publicly known that they are presenting this testimony. Well, the Medicis being this basically mafia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I get
the
that with
banker
that.
mafia. If you fucking piss off the Medicis or try to bring embarrassment or shame to the Medicis, you're not going to make it very far. So this guy ends up clamming up and not saying anything. But at this point, he's under, Leonardo's going to be under a little bit more scrutiny. Next time, if he gets caught, not even this little testimony loophole can actually get him out of, the punishments.
Also, how do you prove sodomy? Are you smelling their penises? Like what? What do you do to prove sodomy?
Is they had somebody end up, it might have been, because the one that they were accused was like a known male prostitute, I think.
Okay.
And so I'm guessing that guy, if they're like, hey, you're either going to be in the dungeon or we're going to kill you or you're going to tell us who it was, he was like, I'll tell you who it was. That guy in the fantastic pink robes? Like, we know him. That guy. What? Seriously?
Him? No. Luckily, he gets out of this because his first independent commission comes pretty quick afterwards in 1478. The Palazzo Vecchio. asked him to paint this altarpiece in the chapel of Saint Bernard. I don't know if this was a chapel for dogs. I'm hoping that it was. It was paid for, but it was never completed. He has, I don't know if it's an artistic thing. I don't know if it's just his mind was drawn in so many different places. You and I kind of talked about it.
He's got ADHD so bad.
He does. He might have been one of the very first undocumented ADHD guys.
So he's going to be notorious for unfinished work. There is so much unfinished work from Leonardo that is still, levels above anybody's finished works. But he's going to be notorious, especially early on, because Verrocchio was actually known to be kind of guilty of the same thing for procrastination. I think it's just you pick up the trait and you're just like, oh, I don't have to finish it. And he's like, don't fucking worry about it. You'll have time to do it later. But,
well, if you're just a commenter and you're looking at something, it's not like there was just a big blank spot on the canvas.
Yeah.
Or a big blank spot on the piece of wood, a big blank spot in the big picture. It was just like the details weren't included yet.
But at the same time, we're so used to like things being done quickly. We take a picture, we look at it. We take a picture so quickly we can look at it and be like, ew, and then go take another one. These paintings, because of their size and how intricate they are, they take years. They can take, because you're not, it takes a while to make your paints daily because you're having to mix the colors just right. So when you do that, you're not making them in fucking gallon cans and having the machine shake them up like at fucking Home Depot.
Yeah.
You're putting them probably on your canvas thing that you're holding, your palette that you're holding, and that's your selection of paint for the day. That's as much as you can fucking use for the day, because not only does it take you so long to apply this correctly and step back and look at your brush stroke and then get back into it. Once you run out of that, you're done for the day. And then guess what? Maybe the next day you're like, I don't feel like I had a very good day that day. I'm going to go ahead and give myself a day off. I want to be able to review this. There were days, with Leonardo that he would come in and he would look at the painting and he would make 3 brush strokes and he would step back and he would look at the painting and be like, okay. And that's all he would do. There were other days where he would paint from fucking sundown to sun up. And I'm not an artist in the sense of this or anything like that. Sometimes if you're spending that much time on one thing, you are probably so fucking bored.
Yeah.
You get done painting, 3/4 of it and you're just like, I need to do something else, because you look back at part of that you're doing it and it's just getting sloppy and lazy. And it's like, when they do the picture of the horse where it's like the really good, well-drawn back end, the middle is okay. And then it's just like for the head. If you got to the point where you're just so bored of that, he just like, I can't phone this in. If I can't do it like I should do it, I need to step back from it. And I want to move on to something else to just clear my head.
Well, and there's also within an artist, a writer, anybody like that, there's sort of this juxtaposition of brilliance and madness where there's really no such thing as a finished piece. You can write a 50-page short story and you can set it aside and go back and look at it in a year and figure out that you need to edit this, or there's something that you could cut these words down to say more by saying less.
Director's cuts, baby.
Yeah, very much so. Again, another form of art to where
I shot all of this. I shot these scenes for a reason, but because of timing, because the studio wanted it on this date, under this time frame, I had to cut a bunch of stuff out. But guess what? 6 months later, I'm putting all the shit back in. It's going to be my vision. And those end up being fucking usually awesome.
Yeah. A piece of art is never really done. It's never really finished. It can always be improved upon, whether it's shading of a face, whether it's trying to bring out more of the background that you want to be seen more.
Whether it's a podcast.
Very true. Yeah, we're always trying to craft a better podcast.
We're artists all on the same vein as like a sandwich artist, correct?
Yep. We went to SU, Subway University, pretty much to...
J.D. McNugent?
Get this all done.
Never heard of such a person.
Ivy League, more or less.
More or less.
But that's... when I hear the words never completed, I do believe that it's just not necessarily because there's just a big blank spot in the area. I just think that there was more that could have been done that maybe he was just ready to move on from.
Well, I think with this deal, this was the deal his dad made for him, where they were like, you're not getting any money up front. You're not getting paid till it gets completed. You have 30, was it months to get it completed? There were two of them, I think, that he had to end up doing. And if he completed them, they were actually going to give him some like land. And if he didn't want it, he could then sell it back to the church for like a buttload of money. And because he ends up not completing either of these, they're like, yeah, so all of the paint supplies that you had to buy, like that's on you. And you actually did take out a bunch of wine on credit. So we're going to need to be paid back for the wine.
Well, you can't drink or you can't paint sober. It's just common sense. I don't know if it was that one or the second commission. The second commission would come in 1481. It was commissioned by the monks of San Donato in Scopeto. And it was to create this thing called the Adoration of the Magi. I believe, and again, this is just me sort of freestyling, we talked about this in Zoroastrianism being like the Magi were basically like the priests. I'm assuming Magi was also could be interchanged with priests, monks, anywhere like that.
Magic.
Huh?
Well, it's one letter short of magic. So
Oh, yeah, true. Magic Magi definitely could be. This was also never finished, and it was never finished because he departs for Milan in 1482. So Italy was never really Italy. I mean, we talked about this during so many different episodes.
it was a lot of city states.
Yes.
Basically, it was like they were just mimicking Greece. Like it was city states. So you would have like the county of Florence, but then another county or another city state, miles down the road might be hostile toward you. You're not united at all. It's, factions that can go to war with each other.
And I think a big part of it was you want to kind of go out and work in these city states for people that maybe have more of a respect for what you're doing. Because Florence is a town of artists. Florence is an area of Italy, or what would become Italy, to where your population density for artists is very, very heavy.
You're in a pond with a lot of other fish, and people had a lot of different choices and can go to somebody else if they're a little bit cheaper, whatnot, especially if you get a reputation for not finishing it.
True.
I don't know how many more people are going to come with you, but he wanted to get out. So it wasn't just like, hey, I'm heading for Milan. He actually sends the Duke of Milan basically kind of his resume, but it's not of stuff he's done yet. He basically sends him this proposal, and he's like, I would like to go ahead and design you implements and like weapons of war. I'd like to be like a war engineer. He's like, I got to get away from the canvas, or not the canvas. I got to get away from this painting. The fumes are starting to get to me. Let me build some stuff that makes it easier for you to kill people.
Well, one of the things that this was sort of an idea that I had heard in a couple documentaries. This guy's name was Lodovico Sforza, and he was the Duke of Milan, and he had this idea that he wanted to build this giant equestrian bronze statue. Mm-hmm. And Da Vinci had heard about it. He's like, well, I got to get me some of that. I'd like to go over there and be a part of that and make this big, massive art piece happen.
It was a monument, I think, to his father, right?
Yes, I believe he'd won a war or something along those lines, and he wanted to give this big giant horse to his father. The services that he offered, engineering, as you said, weapons design, and painting. He does end up getting chosen. He does end up heading to Milan. He's chosen for his musical abilities.
He's actually, it's kind of weird. He's also kind of sent over as an ambassador by the Medici. So at this point, I guess, like, to stay in, I think the Medici or them, they were looking essentially to have like a military alliance with Milan, or at least get on friendly terms. And they're like, hey, Da Vinci's talented. They'll like his artsy shit. Let's go ahead and also, he wants to go there. He's mentioned wanting to go to Milan. Let's just go ahead and send him over there in like an ambassador role. And they can, use him for artsy shit.
Well, Milan's like, we have a lot of this other stuff. You any good with music? He's like, yeah, no, I play a lyre. I'm pretty good on the lyre. He has this giant silver horse head lyre that I guess they said, along with the music, was just kind of like a work of art in and of itself that you could go and watch him play.
He pulls it out, and the guy looks at it, and he's like, "Oh, yeah, it's nice, right?" And he's like, "Is that a horse?" He's like, "I'm very good with horses, as you can see. Do you see the neck musculature, the veining, the vascularity? Do you see the attention to detail? And this is just this is just my musical instrument.
This is giant and it's silver and it's
I
a
made
horse
this
head.
on a Thursday. Imagine what I could do with time and resources. But first, let me play you this tune.
I could bang out a giant bronze horse if I wanted to.
Exactly.
Just, in case that ever comes up.
Really been looking into working with bronze.
His time in Florence before leaving Milan saw the creation of some of his earliest paintings. One of really the first that we'll get into is the Madonna of the Carnation. It was painted, and again, this is what Chris is talking about, when these things just take time. 1472 to 1478, 6 years of the oil painting of the Virgin Mary. Before that, it is...
We're getting to the picture. Got it.
And I didn't know this. Apparently, Madonna is just Mary. That, I guess, sort of makes sense. I mean, they both start with M.
So do you think that's why Madonna chose Madonna?
Possibly. She does have like a virgin. So, and this painting is just basically, it's an oil painting. It's on a piece of wood. I don't think it was poplar. I don't exactly remember what kind of wood it was.
It did matter.
Yeah.
It did matter.
This is a depiction of the Virgin Mary with a very fat Jesus sitting on her lap.
Chunky baby Jesus.
And I'm assuming that the reason why El Jesus was so fat was probably because he was well taken care of, and they wanted to show this in this picture. The faces are put into light, and then the objects are darkened in the background, almost to show sort of like the Lord's light being shined down on his son, and then the Virgin Mary that was given the immaculate ability to have this child while being a virgin. The carnation red that's used is supposed to be like a rendition of the blood of Christ that will then be shed later on. And again, this is artistic jargon that I would love to believe, but at the same time, it sounds kind of like they're just making up a great story.
It's interpretation. Set aside the artistic interpretation of like the symbolism about what this color, what this could look, what looking this direction could mean. What does the background mean? If you were to just look at this from the standpoint of the technical part of the painting of this, that is what impresses me as far as like the clothing and how you can tell exactly how it's bunched, the anatomical, like the baby Jesus, about the wrinkles of the chubby baby parts just being like exactly where they would be, the proportions of things. And even like if you look down kind of in the bottom right hand side, like look how much detail is in those flowers.
Yeah.
Behind her and off to the side.
Yeah, it's just a part of the landscape back behind her. And if you even, and again, we're looking at these pictures, but the hair on Mary's head, you can see the intricate braidings of her hair. You can see the curls, and it's because these are different things that he's studied, how hair lays, what a braid would actually look like in hair to be able to try to make it as authentic as possible.
Okay, I want to rabbit hole for a second with a question before we take a bathroom break. Do you think Leonardo, because there were people at this time that were not of the religious persuasion that had ideas outside of like a monotheistic God?
Paganism at that point, I think.
That's what they would call it.
Yeah.
Do you believe that Leonardo, based on stuff we'll discuss and like the astrology and astronomy, or not astrology, Jesus, the astronomy that he looked into, things like that, the paleontology that he did, knowing about certain like the fossil like layers and stuff, do you think he was a person that believed in God, or like one God?
A pious man?
Yeah.
I would say pious probably, and again, this is just a shot in the dark here, but pious to a certain point to be able to look at like the Gospels that we'll talk about that he references during the Last Supper, and to be able to read the information.
That's what I'm getting at. The whole point about like certain symbolism and colors and things like that. I want to imagine that he just paints these things and he's like, I'm going to paint it how I want. And I'm going to paint using these colors because I think they look really good. And then when they come and they ask me, because he was kind of famous for that, is they would just kind of tell him what they wanted. And sometimes he would get close and they would be happy with it and they'd be like, oh, you did what I... And sometimes he would just be like, I'm just going to give you my interpretation of what this is. I could see it being a situation where after he's done and they come up and being like, okay, well, explain this and everything. He's like, so the red on the sleeves, that's obviously the blood of Christ. The blue that she is wearing representing, him as a boy, but also the femininity and the fertility of the mother. He is obviously a fat baby because he's living large.
Well-fed.
He's well-fed. You can't have an emaciated Jesus. We do get ripped Jesus later on, but right now also makes Jesus relatable. He was a fat kid.
Baby Jesus is in his bulking stage right now.
Exactly. And as you can see, he's looking here at this thing which symbolizes yada, and they're just like, oh, fantastic. And he just walks away being like, whew.
Got him.
You nailed it.
Nailed it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I don't necessarily believe that he was a strict adherent to all of Jesus's teachings based upon, I think, some of his proclivities. But at the same time, I think that he was smart enough to know how to work within the system.
He was very well versed in it, just because I think you probably had to be to operate in that society and not be just cast out.
He was smart in everything.
Yeah, exactly.
It would stand to reason that he could figure out biblicisms pretty well.
Okay, before we get even deeper into this, let's take a bathroom break.
Well, hey there, all you sexy historians. How you guys doing?
It is time for
Socials.
Where can they find us on Instagram?
If they want to follow us, they can find us at Historically High Pod on Instagram.
That goes the same for Threads as well. You can also find us on Twitter.
Tell them about Twitter.
Historically High. That's Historically HI on Twitter.
And if you want to email any of your comments or suggestions, where can they find us at, Adam?
At Historically High Podcast at gmail.com.
Gmail. All right, and back to the show.
All right, next one up. What do we got?
Leonardo da Vinci it was a portrait that was drawn of this 15th century aristocrat named Leonardo da Vinci. So great name of this painting, obviously.
Not just a clever name.
A lot of thought that went into it. It took from 1474 to 1480. So again, we're getting this overlap of him doing the Madonna of the Carnation in this self-portrait of Minerva. This was possibly made to commemorate this marriage that she had just undertaken, gone through, whatever you call it back then. I don't even know if this stuff was arranged. It was made with both oil and tempera. So you have the non-translucent tempera that's kind of the undertone, and then you lay it on top with these oil paintings. It was one of the first like full-facing portraits that was sort of done in this time period. And kind of like what I was talking about earlier, you always usually see like a half profile to where you're catching half of the face.
Or straight on.
Yeah.
And then that's why it looks weird.
And everything becomes very, very flat. So in order to give kind of this full profile and to use these oil paintings, you can see the depth of her cheeks. You can see her cheekbones coming out. You can also see just the defined curls inside of her hair. This is personally one of my favorites just because I could stare at it all day long.
Because you said her name essentially was Spruce.
It translates to juniper.
Juniper. Sorry, my kid's been watching a lot of fucking trolls band together, and one of them's name is Spruce.
Okay.
No, so the juniper, the detail, and I know some of these, when he does these portraits, this isn't like, your little standard, probably like 2 foot by 2 foot or whatever. These are larger, but the amount of, we geeked out on this over the little break, but just looking at the detail of each individual needle of the spruce and the shading, and then you look beyond that and you see the little pond and the reflections of the trees in the pond. And then you look beyond that and there's a rolling hill with other trees. And then you look beyond that and there's another hill in the far, and you can tell the distance from each of these.
Yeah, it's just the perspective is absolutely incredible. And also including the juniper bush behind a woman who's named after this natural bush, like just this natural beauty that's brought into her because of the nature that's behind her.
One of the things that he kind of pioneered is he understood that when you're looking at something from a distance, that the air obfuscates essentially, or can change the color and tones. He's like, that's why when you look at mountains far away, they look purple. You know that they're not purple, but that's actually what color you're seeing them as. And so if you look back, you can tell essentially where that distance of the eye starts to give a little bit of that. And then you see those hills in the back as like almost like a purplish tint.
Well, and it's such a deep earth toned painting to where her skin is very pale. She's wearing a brown dress. She has a black, darkish brown drapery. She has kind of a straw golden blonde hair. But the tie in front of her dress, in front of her cleavage, is this beautiful blue that draws your eye. And then after that draws your eye, you can also then look into the background and into the scape and see the color
curls
of the
of her
sky.
hair.
Yeah. It's so detailed. And these were things that he studied. The natural curl of a hair, how that shadow would also lay against another one. He was just so deep into these, and it was so intricately done.
How many times, because of the time frame that it takes to do this, and I know that he gets the portrait done first, then he's like, I don't need you anymore. I can do the background. But still, how many times, hours did she have to sit there for him to be able to do different parts? He's like, okay, I can remember this part. I'll finish this up. But I mean, with the time it takes and with the detail that he did, especially like the hair and everything like that, she's just like, fuck, are we done yet?
I think he was good enough that it wouldn't quite take as long as you would think it would, because when it comes to a certain point and he understands shading, if you look underneath the chin and the shading down onto the neck, and then you can literally almost see the musculature in her neck kind of starting to form these other shadows, that's all just kind of based upon what he knows shading does.
That's true.
So it's just the brilliance in what he does and how he creates this stuff is, and this is a very early work. Like, we're still 25 years before we get to the Mona Lisa.
Yeah.
So this is still before he kind of creates this safado. Once I see the word, I'm going to pronounce it right, but I'm going to keep fucking it up until then. This technique that he uses that kind of becomes synonymous with the artists that work underneath him and the apprentices. He's not quite to the point yet where he is taking on apprentices, but once he does, he kind of changes the way that the people, the underlings that are beneath him, start to work. We get to another portrait of Madonna, of Mary, the Benoit's Madonna.
So the one we just discussed was a private commission.
Yes.
This one is now going back to painting something for a clergy, church, cathedral, whatever.
Oh yeah, and it's a very similar style to what he had done before with the first Madonna, as it's Mary and Jesus as well, back in it again. This one only took 2 years, though. This is 1478 to 1480. So again, he's working all of these at the same time. He's setting something down that he feels like he's worked on enough and goes and touches something else.
I can see where he cut time on this one, because Mary's not as attractive.
No, but she's almost more childlike. She's
Yeah.
almost more infantile. And a big change in this, it's also oil painted. It was believed to be painted outside of Verrocchio's tutelage. So this was like the first time that he didn't have any insight from Verrocchio. Mm-hmm. It was most likely overpainted by restorers. So there are parts of it that are touched up in less of his style. One of the biggest things that I always look at just going through these Da Vinci paintings is the way that the hands are created and the way that they almost look so realistic and lifelike. And part of it is usually people aren't great at drawing hands. Like, some people are very good.
What's that off of? I can't draw hands. Like, it's a movie or show where he's like, I'm a really good artist, I just can't draw hands.
I know what you're talking about. It's not coming either. Somebody knows what we're talking about. But just to see almost like you were talking about with the superheroes, how they start drawing the circles, you can almost see the skeletal systems inside of these hands. And even in Pudgy Jesus's fingers, you can see that that's exactly what a baby's hand would look like at that point in time. With the way that her hand is articulated between his, I believe he's holding a carnation. I mean, it's just a way that somebody would be holding on to this, and Mary and Jesus aren't sitting right in front of him. So this is just him drawing this out of his memory. He also the addition to this painting beyond the first Madonna is there are halos. There are angelic halos around them. The faces are painted very vividly. This is kind of where you start to see that there's no really defined lines in the faces as far as just the shading, bringing her nose forward or putting the button on Big Jesus's nose. His cheeks are so chubby to where you can see the shadow beneath on his chin from where the light would be coming off of. I mean, it's just, they're all such great works of art. And there's also the addition of Mary smiling down upon Jesus. So you're starting to be able to see him being able to play with this version of a smile that we get when it comes time for Mona Lisa.
Leonardo, we love your previous work, but we want the happy Mary. She has the baby. Make her happy. It's like, Jesus Christ. On it.
Yeah, he'll be in the picture too. We want him in there too. 1479, the sketch of the hanging Bernardo Baroncelli. This was just a quick, rough sketch that he made, and the reason that it had to be a quick, rough sketch was this was a guy that was involved in a plot to kill the Medici brothers, and as his body was hanging in the square, Leonardo was like, I'll sketch him. I'll see what we can make happen here. But it almost looks like you would see a cartoon drawing now.
It almost kind of seems like a courtroom stenographer. He's trying to do it that quickly to like describe the courtroom scene. He's like, the body keeps swinging. He's like, can someone hold it like just an ankle, but not get in the shot?
The wind keeps kind of pushing him one way. We got to stop that sale from happening. While he was working in Milan, he ends up being there for 17 years. He would be commissioned to paint the Virgin of the Rocks. And the very interesting thing about being commissioned to paint the Virgin of the Rocks is there are actually 2 copies of the Virgin of the Rocks in existence.
So this is during his first Milanese period.
Is that what they call it?
Yeah. 1482 to 1499.
But the reason that there possibly could be 2 versions of the Virgin of the Rocks is because Leonardo might have privately sold off the first one. And as he may have privately sold off the first one, he made a couple of changes and a couple of tweaks that would then end up being the one that was made to fulfill the commission. The differences are pretty minor. The first one actually was, it is put in the Louvre. That one is the one that's in the Louvre.
Put it in the Louvre.
The second one is I believe it's in the Museum of London. There's very kind of stark differences in the pictures. There is Mary holding what is believed to be John the Baptist back from the left, because John the Baptist is kind of who starts Jesus' descension down in. There is also an angel pointing towards the child that's believed to be John the Baptist, kind of saying like, this is the guy maybe you should watch out for. That in the second one that was made to fulfill the commission doesn't actually appear in. There's also a halo in the second one over Jesus and Mary and actually John the Baptist as well. There's very stark differences. There's also this finger, again, like I said, that articulation of the hands just absolutely blows me away.
I love looking at them because it basically looks like if you... I'm simplifying this to such a degree, but it's the red one and the blue one.
Yeah.
It's how the London has the blue one and Paris has the red one. But the biggest differences for me on this is looking at the one that is in Paris, the one that's in the blue garb and everything. To me, is that the one that that's not the one he supposedly sold?
London is the blue. So the Louvre is the first one, the one in the red.
Okay, so the first one, which one is the one he supposedly sold?
The first one, the one that's in the Louvre.
Okay. The reason I look at that is, and I can believe that, is if you look at that one and you look at basically the 4 subjects of the painting are sitting in like a cave, like a seaside cave. Mm-hmm. And the detail on this one that's in Paris, the one with red, is insane. Like he studied hydrodynamics, and so he was very curious about like the erosion, and he like put that into his, nothing was smooth. Like nature wasn't smooth. Like in a cave, he's not going to make like stalagmites and stalactites that just like look totally uniform. He's like, no, like once these things wear down, they become jagged and things like that. So this seaside cave, like just immense detail paid to each of these little outcroppings and stuff. You go down to the one that is, with them in blue, quite a bit. I mean, still really good.
Yeah.
But quite a bit less detail. Like he was just like, okay, I used too much red in the last one. What am I going to do in this one? He's like, I got a lot of blue left over. We'll go ahead and use that. He's like, oh, I got to get this done quicker. Okay. Just going to go ahead and kind of like dial back on the details of the rocks, and they'll never know. They're never going to know.
Well, who did he sell the first one to? Like, who was walking by and just saw it, was like, hey, I really like that. What do you got going on there? He's like, this is for a commission that I have to get done. And he's like, well, how much is the commission? And he's like, 500,000 francs or rubles or whatever.
He was hired by the church to do it?
I believe so, just because it's Mary again.
Duke of Milan walks in, takes a look at it, and he's like,
oh, yeah?
I like it. I want it. He's like, I can't really fucking say no. I'm here. I can't really say no to the Duke. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess. Here you go. It's like, fuck, I got to paint another one.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that I can take my cartoon renderings and recreate this pretty well.
I feel like Paris has the good one, though.
They do, for sure. These paintings are kind of known to really kind of perfectly encapsulate Da Vinci's use of what I've been talking about, this sfumato, SFUMATO. It's this technique to kind of... He created this technique out of the research that he did into optics and human vision, of how you are able to look and focus in at one thing, but then as you look off into parts of the other painting, things start to fall out of your line of sight. Your peripheries pick up different things. This is very big when we start talking about the Mona Lisa, because there's points and times when Mona Lisa's smiling at you. Depending on where you're looking at it, she's very stoic.
This plays huge in The Last Supper. He also does one before The Last Supper when he starts to understand the concept of studying human optics. He's like, not everybody stands in the same place when they're viewing this. If you're standing over on the left-hand side, you're going to see it differently than if you're standing over on the right-hand side. He starts to take these things into account where, based on the most likely place for someone to stand, he starts to learn to put alterations into these. So one of them, an arm is noticeably longer and everything. But if you were standing over to the left side of it, because of the way you're looking down on it, the arm would then look shorter because you're seeing a smaller portion of it or from a different angle. So he's thinking of this from so many different facets. And the other thing that's nuts about these two, Virgin on the Rocks, sounds like a drink.
Yeah, it does.
What, sorry. Yeah, it was Virgin. Yeah. Oh, Virgin of the Rock. Sorry.
On whatever.
They were both 6 feet tall.
Pretty big paintings.
6 feet tall.
I never got the exact height on the boy, but I'm sure he wasn't. Italians were probably right around mid-5s.
He's still not reaching. He's got scaffolding.
Probably. Yeah, or at least a step stool, or maybe one of his apprentices at that point, or
two of them, one for each foot. He's like, quit fucking shifting.
Left, right, left. Yeah, perfectly just getting into it. 1495, he is commissioned to begin work on The Last Supper, which didn't know where it was. It was done in a convent of Santa Maria del Grazie in Milan, which if you would have told me, hey, here's $100 if you can tell me where The Last Supper is, I definitely would have said Rome.
I would have said in a museum.
Probably, yeah, huh? But yeah, in Milan, I never would have guessed that it would have been there. His study materials for this, like we were talking about earlier, he would use the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, to tell the story of the moments surrounding Jesus telling his apostles of the betrayal that was going to occur. This is also where we get him showing them the Eucharist. So sacrament, basically, the body is the bread, the blood is the wine. And what really stands out, and Chris talked about this earlier, This thing is 15 feet tall by 28 feet wide. So 400 for everybody outside the United States, it uses probably the more correct system, 460 centimeters by 880 centimeters.
The characters are essentially almost life size,
Pretty much.
almost to scale. There's so many like conspiratorial things, like hidden things, like within the Last Supper. We're not going to discuss those.
No.
But a few things that are pointed out about it that, again, just glancing at something you don't notice. So there was a time period in which Da Vinci, I want to say he either had an apprentice or a student that he worked with, or an individual that was deaf. And that person, because of the way they had to communicate, and again, Italy is a place where they communicate by hand. That person would have to use exaggerated gestures and use their hand gestures, not sign language, to get points across. Leonardo was a huge student about, they call it Baroque art now, where it's something caught in the moment. Like there's even accidental Baroque art that's like a drawing or a picture or a painting of like a baseball stadium and the hot dog guy's throwing the hot dog and it's in there. It's capturing a moment in time when stuff is not actually stationary. So by looking at it, you can tell people are in movement. It's not just like a self-portrait, someone just sitting there having their picture drawn. And so you see all of these because, again, like Adam said, this is the moment when, JC's like, one of you motherfuckers is going to, betray me. Who is it? And everybody is having their different reaction to this.
Almost everybody.
You're having somebody trying to make like a point, and you can tell they're trying to do that because they're putting their index finger into their palm. You have certain people that are, throwing their hands up in outrage or confusion. Their faces have certain reactions on them. And so it's like, it's supposed to be a snapshot of the first 3 seconds and everybody's reaction as soon as Jesus says, tries to, or calls somebody out. And so that's why it looks like everybody's out of their seat. They're not sitting there for the Last Supper in certain ways. This is a moment that's encapsulated. One of the, if you look at it and you're not just seeing a picture of it, but you actually can see the room in which it's located as well. The angles of the walls within the house or whatever, Jesus was having his Last Supper in, followed the same angles of the walls that move into the wall in which is painted. So it looks like an extension. It's like when you see a mirror wall and it looks like there's another room on the other side.
Yep.
It looks like there's another room on the other side because you can see the angle of the wall still following the natural walls back.
Well, and a massive part of this is because he was such a student of geometry that before he starts painting, he gets up on this ledge and he starts laying out basically a grid pattern as far as where everybody's going to be placed, where Jesus is going to be in this picture, and he's just basically doing like rough.
He drives a nail in.
Yes.
Like right where Jesus is going to be. And then he's like, I know that I have to take all of this as my focal point. So as he starts drawing the faces and the heads, he knows they all have to follow a line to this one singular point.
Well, like Chris was talking about earlier, there were recordings that there were days when he would get up and just start painting. He wouldn't stop for lunch. He wouldn't stop to drink. He wouldn't stop to eat. He would be finished as soon as the sun went down because they didn't really have any other natural light to go on to be able to paint under. And then there were days when he would show up and he would work on one face and just be like, all right, I think I'm out. I think I'm good for the day. The independence of every single one of the apostles that's sitting there as far as their dress, as Chris was saying, their mannerisms, the way that their hands are moving, the expressions on their faces, everybody is so unique within what they're doing that it almost does bring kind of like this realistic feel of movement.
I love that the look that Jesus exemplifies what he is basically just like everyone's going, who is it, Jesus? Who is Jesus? And he's kind of looking down at me like, well, I don't know, guys. Who is it? He's just got this like coy look and he's got his palm turned upwards and he's like, I don't know, it could be anyone.
And there's also this field of vision of Jesus looking straight out is because on the opposite end wall in this room is a fresco done that's actually the crucifixion that was done by Giovanni Donato. So this is Jesus looking in this room straight directly over at the picture of his crucifixion. So mere days, weeks, whatever it is, it's like he's looking directly across this room into his future.
It's like a flip book. You walk in, you see his picture, and like, oh, they're having dinner. I wonder what happened, what they did after dinner. You turn around like, oh, shit.
Oh, no.
No, Jesus.
The one stoic person in the Last Supper just happens to be the one guy that was said to have been the one that did the deception. Judas Iscariot is sitting there basically just numb-faced, no movements, anything like that, just sitting quiet as a church mouse. And Judas is actually used as sort of a bargaining chip.
Which one's Judas?
He is sitting to the left.
Is he the one right next to Mary that has his head kind of like pointing through, just kind of like peeking at Jesus, being like, oh shit, does he know it's me?
Yes.
Okay, so him right there. I love the guy that is to Jesus's right, if you're looking at the painting, that's got his arms out, and he's kind of holding back the other one. He's like, okay, settle down. Let's settle down. Give Jesus some space.
Yeah, he's trying to teach us about the Eucharist. Let's figure this all out. So, as these things do, they end up taking quite a while. He would work on the Last Supper without consistency for 4 years. And granted, this is a gigantic painting. It is very detailed. It's just an incredible piece. During the stretch run of this 4 years, there were monks that were complaining about the speed that it would take him to get this done because he's not doing this in the normal fresco style. He's using tempera, he's using oil. Basically, to get him off his back, Da Vinci's like, hey, everybody needs to pipe down because I haven't put the expression or the look on Judas's face. And these two monks that keep getting on my ass about this, next one of you that mentions my name, I'm going to put your face on Judas's face.
I could just see him. He's like, you know what's weird? I see both your faces so often coming up to me to complain that when I get to Judas's face, I don't know if I'm going to be able to see anyone else's face but your guys's. And I'll be forced to Judas you.
Not my choice.
He's
This is
like,
your guys'
well,
choice."
there's two of us. He's like, listen, I can always paint another one of these.
Yep. And you've seen how good I am. You don't think I can make both your faces
You don't
look like
think
this
I can
guy?
make two Judases in here?
I'll sneak one of you guys in there trying to make off with the wine and the bread behind everybody's back if you're not careful. So this is, like we talked about earlier, this was done in such a different way as opposed to the fresco on the opposite wall that within like 5 years after the Last Supper is completed, this paint starts flaking off because you don't take into account the humidity, the temperature, the wind that comes through these buildings. Because again, there's no windows on these places.
Yeah.
This is just kind of open air. If the doors are open, everything's blowing in. And if not, there's still a stiff breeze probably. After that happens, Ludovic...
And are you like, it's going to get dusty.
Oh, all the...
And I'm sure that there was some type of like maintenance routine about like cleaning and dusting and getting stuff off. If you don't know what the fuck you're doing, you're like, oh, it's getting dusty, and you just start going around and trying to brush shit up against it, it's going to start flaking and chipping stuff off.
Well, and even while you're working on it, you have wet oil and wet egg on the side of a wall trying to dry. It's going to be probably pretty penetrated by whatever's blowing onto it.
Do you think there was ever a problem with him procuring, like, he showed up and his eggs weren't there, and he's like, the fuck are my eggs? They're like, I'm sorry, sir, some foxes got to the chickens. We're trying to find replacements.
There's just like 5 apprentices out there running around trying to catch the chickens and squeeze some more eggs out of them. Probably. It's a work of art that I think everybody knows. You can say Last Supper to probably anybody on the planet, and if they have some sort of religious background, they're going to know. And even if they don't, if they have any understanding of art, they know that.
Yeah, I mean, it's
the
been
Last Supper
parodied
exists.
so many times. My favorite might be like that 70s show one.
There's also a Simpsons version, I believe.
Oh, of
that's
course there's a
pretty
Simpsons
good.
version
Yeah,
of
Simpsons
it.
version and everything, huh? So, Ludovico Sforza, the guy that he was working with in Milan, Sforza, ends up being overthrown by France in 1500, and Da Vinci took his buddies Celia and Luca Pisoli to Venice, the city of canals. He was employed there as a military architect and engineer, so we're going to get away from painting a little bit because he needs to start figuring out how to give Venice the ability to defend themselves from naval attacks. Because again, when you have canals that run all through your cities, you're going to need to defend your water.
Come on,
well.
Leo, you've been waiting for this. You've been preparing for this. What do you got?
Oh yeah, and that's the other thing was the reason that he went to Milan was kind of try to be this military architect and to try to get his hands on this big ass bronze horse that he was going to build. And then all of a sudden he gets this chance in Venice where they're like, "Hey, do you know anything about military?" He's like, "Bro, I got a journal that's got this thing that looks like a tank.
I got ideas out the ass, my man." Oh shit! Your city is like on the water.
Yeah,
it's on the. Oh, it's in and on the water. Okay. I don't know if I got anything for that. Let me cook something up.
Let me study the water a little bit. Maybe I can get some stuff figured out. Maybe I'll throw something sub the marine layer. I don't know what that would be called. Maybe a submarine.
Have you seen cross sections of how Venice works underneath it? When we do Venice, it's going to blow your. I'm not going to get in, but it will blow your mind. Oh, and also, how about the pyramid news?
Pyramid news is huge. I haven't really looked into it beyond what you shared with me and what we talked about, but
it's nuts.
It's one of those things that I don't know if our minds are quite, anybody's minds are quite able to understand.
Something that's also nuts is when kind of before he ends up leaving and heading back to Florence, this is kind of when he also gets into the study of like anatomy.
Yep.
And his understanding essentially of human movement and the human form. There's this thing because of his connections within the court of Milan, I believe he had some higher connections to other documents and studies, things that he normally wouldn't have, things that were normally reserved for those people in positions of power, how they would learn about certain things. So he gets access to these writings and the works of this guy named Vitruvius. And Vitruvius basically talked about the harmony of the human body. And in a nutshell, basically kind of what both Leonardo and Vitruvius's kind of thought process on this is that the body is its own version of measurement, simply in different quantities. It's the kind of the adage when you're like from the tip of your finger to, the crux of your elbow is supposed to be 1/4 your size, or your wingspan is supposed to be equal to your height. The distance between the bottom of your heel and the back of your knee is supposed to be, again, like 1/4 of it. It's basically saying that the body is in harmony with itself.
It's like an immaculate measurement system.
Exactly. They called it, I'm trying to remember exactly how they phrased it, ideal body proportions or something like that. But this is where you get the illustration of Leonardo's Vitruvian Man, which is basically, you always see it on like, it's the sepia tone type paper, and it's the dude with his arms splayed out either directly out to his side and his feet together, overlapped with the guy doing almost like a bad jumping jack. He basically just has his feet spread out a little bit and then his arms. And it's supposed to signify essentially, because there's a perfect sphere around this person, that when you do this, your feet simply in the angles of where you can touch simply follow the interior of this sphere, meaning that your movement is equal at kind of like all angles.
The NBA would have thrown off the Vitruvian Man so fast. You got guys like Durant who are 6'11" that have 7'5" wingspans.
I didn't say it was perfect. I just said the guy drew it and what the idea.
They would measure these guys so heavily though. They get Wemby and they'd look at it and be like, "You're 7'4".
What are you?
Your wingspan is 8'1" and you're 7'4". How is this possible? Like,
I must paint you.
yeah.
Well, part of this also leads into his, I don't want to call it an obsession, but it is this crazy curiosity with the structure of the human body and the workings of the human body. Enough so that over the course of 30 years, he dissects about 30 bodies, both male and female, of varying ages.
And that's just humans. We're not even talking about all the
horses
animals.
Or pets or dogs, stuff like that. He made over 200 drawings featuring like the skeleton. He was able to determine, because he would get these. Okay, this is what I'm picturing in my head. No refrigeration. There's no cold places.
No.
You're in Milan, which I don't know if Milan has what, winters are like there, if they're mild or kind of what the summers. I expect Milan, that area, Mediterranean, is probably pretty warm, maybe in the summer. So he is having to have a connection to get these bodies and be able to get them fast enough that he's able to perform this research. And that involves and this is going to sound gross, essentially like flaying them to see what the musculature and the structure and everything like that looks like underneath, the connection of bones to tendons. He's doing it all. If you pull up some of his drawings, he did dissections of the human heart, which the drawings have been reviewed by like medical professionals and being like, this is like his theories on the heart. He didn't exactly understand how blood worked. He thought that blood actually was eaten up by the muscles in some way, but he understood essentially of the 4 chambers of the heart and how the actual ebb and flow in the blood worked.
The valves open and close.
The valves opening and closing.
And he did a lot of them on humans, but at the same time, after the blood stops pumping, things sort of tend to flatten out.
Yeah.
He did a lot of his renderings and drawing off of like cow hearts, just because they're 5 times the size of a human heart
and everything like that.
You can see a lot more. I will say, I understand that it sounds creepy and it sounds horrible, and maybe I'm out myself here. Once you can get over the fact that that's a human body, which is a pretty big hurdle to jump over, to look at the beauty of the vascular systems and the way that the muscles work together in order to form a movement and what fires at the same time, it's art. It's beauty to see the way that the body works in such a harmony to be able to just an everyday movement.
There's a show that goes around to certain like museums called Bodies in Motion, and that's when it shows you all of that. It's like down to just the musculature. Kind of thinking about it from a standpoint of then and now, there would be no reason to do that because we already kind of know everything about that. So
somebody else did it.
Exactly. So in our minds, the only reason that you would ever do that is because you're a fucking psychopath. There would be no need to do it other than you getting some type of weird fucking gratification out of it.
Other than you're Jeffrey Dahmer.
You also have the natural preservation to preserve life, I believe. And so just simply working on that, you're just like, it's already dead. Like it's weird.
Yeah.
Like, this is just really strange. For him, having no intention of needing to save this person, having no obligation to do anything but view this thing for the sheer scientific documentation and study of it all. Yeah, that's just a switch that you got to kind of flip off and be like, this is just another machine I'm studying. It's just a biological machine, and I'm just trying to figure out how this thing works. Some of the drawings that I sent you where it actually breaks down like how the tendons connect the muscles and how it moves and everything, they're insane. And you can just see the notes scribbled into everything. Oh, how the fuck did we forget this? How did he write?
I was going to bring it up a little later. He was a left-handed man. He was a left-handed man that used something called mirror, I believe it was mirror drawing, mirror sketching, to where, because he's a lefty and because they were using live ink and quills, you can't just run your left hand over everything and start blotting out your ink.
Neither of us are left-handed.
No.
I knew a couple lefties in school, and I remember looking over there, and of course it looks just strange because everyone else is right-handed, but when you're looking at their notebook and you see them literally just dragging their hand across what they just wrote, it just smudged everything. Writing left-handed has to probably be one of the worst, things that people don't like about being left-handed.
Has to be.
But Da Vinci is not only writing right to left in this, he's writing it in mirror script. So he's writing right to left to stop from smearing the ink, and then his notes can only be written if they're used and flipped in a mirror.
It's mind-blowing that he was able to teach himself how to do that.
And he's got to be so quick at it based on the amount of notes and everything like that he took.
Well, not to mention just writing it, but if you are scribing something from a book and you're just trying to write it word for word, you're reading left to right, but then as you're writing it, you're literally mirroring it left or right to left, and all of your letters are switched the opposite direction.
It's fucking nuts.
The fact that was easier for him to do than just learning how to write right-handed is very odd to me.
What's got to be crazy too, and there's a few inventions that he has sketches for that have been like constructed to see, if they would work. Some of them don't work, but the ones that they found for the majority that don't work, and there's just a few of them that don't actually function, they found that if they just switched one thing around, it was functional. And part of him writing backwards mirror script, I think, was because it was a necessity for him. But the requirement to do it actually where it was mirror script makes me kind of lean into the concept of him maybe being secretive with his stuff.
Yeah.
And being like, this stuff, especially the studies, because he's the only one kind of doing this at this point. His plans for certain war machines, his studies on anatomy. If someone else just came along and could read exactly what he was doing, it would be kind of probably easy for maybe someone to take credit for his work or kind of steal an idea. But if someone grabs that paper and it looks like complete gibberish on there and they can't make any sense of it, they're going to be like, I can't do anything. This thing's fucking useless.
Well, and it's not in Latin either.
Yeah.
So it's a completely different language too. Part of the reason why I think some of the stuff that they look at as far as like his version of an early car or anything like that, and they say, well, this technically couldn't work because of this, this, and this, that's because they're pigeonholing it as this was his invention of a car, not something that was to be used similar to, like his version of a car is said to have not worked because of, I think there was 2 or 3 different things. His version of a car, just looking at his notes and studying it, was just a vehicle to take someone across a stage during a play. So it's not necessarily he's trying to build an automobile.
It was very specifically designed, and chances are it could have had something to accompany it, like a track
Yeah.
or something like that was written on another piece of paper. Or a lot of the stuff, especially like as a when he was like a musical and he was singing and everything like that, he never wrote down any of his music. They said he would just come up with stuff on the spot. And so you'd be getting different things every time.
This man, if he had died in an age of refrigeration and we had known more about the brain, if he had studied more of his own brain, I feel like we'd have had some pretty major breakthroughs. And there's stuff like his work with the heart. There are surgeons that have come along and looked at his notes and his blueprints and been like, had we had an understanding of the heart the way that he did back then, and this was published and we could have worked from there with all of this time, our advances in medicine could have been so much further than they are now because of his basic understandings of what was going on then.
He was the first to draw the appendix. He was the first to draw the lungs, the urinary tract, the reproductive organs, which had to be fun, of course.
I bet he liked drawing the urinary tract. He probably had a lot of practice. A lot of penises.
But yeah, understanding, his forte, the stuff that's the most accurate they've reviewed is like the skeletal structure of the anatomy and everything. He a little bit spotty on organs, not so much in the actual depiction of them, but he would also make notes down about how their function was and everything. It wasn't just like, I just draw the liver to draw the liver. I don't know what it does. He was essentially making assumptions on what things did. So while the drawings are accurate, he was off on a few things, which for the time, biologically, cutting open and just trying to dissect something that's dead, still pretty fucking good.
He was off for the time. He was leagues above of anyone else that was trying to do the same thing.
That's the complaint. Well, he didn't know what all the organs did. Yeah, nobody knew what all the fucking organs did. People thought we were just like beings of magic.
Yeah, he was the closest to what is accurate. And also at the same time, when you're doing dissections on animals and you're doing dissections on humans, animals' organs, while looking similar, also have different structures inside of them because we just walk and are shaped differently.
Does he go back to Florence and then when does the horse come into play? When does the horse statue happen?
Is that after he goes and works for Borgia?
No, because the horse statue he's working for Sforza.
Okay.
To do.
The horse statue never ends up coming to kind of fruition. He draws the blueprints to be able to basically build it and smelt it. And they say that the size and the dimensions were that it would take like an entire building to be able to pour the mold for the body.
Yeah, so just, I'm not going to go too in depth on it, but it's really fascinating, just kind of the audacity of what he believed he could do. So Sforza wants this monument made, and it's a bronze cast horse that's then going to be, I think, like gold plated, gold coated, something like that. So to make this, he's like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and make this fucking enormous. So it's going to be 24 feet tall, which a horse that's 24 feet tall, horses are longer. So it's going to be that much longer. I think they said it was going to weigh something in the neighborhood of like 70 tons. It was supposed to be enormous.
To be able to cast that, you would need a massive pit.
So the methods of casting at the time were you could cast it in layers, in which you would cast the first 10 feet, then you would build the mold on top of that, then you would pour the additional bronze, then you would do kind of that until you built it all the way up. Because of doing it in that method, you had to wait for the bronze to cool, then heat up more bronze poured on top. if the temperatures weren't exactly the same, the bronze could be discolored. It would maybe be hard to go ahead and hide the seams. It might not fit correctly. So Da
It might not
Vinci,
fuse together.
exactly. Well, okay. So hold on. I do have to mention that one of the projects that he did, and I can't remember if it was when he was with
Sforza.
not Sforza, Verrocchio, was they were making this thing that was going to go on the top of like a cathedral in Florence.
Yeah.
And it was a sphere, but the sphere was actually going to be cast in bronze. And so in order to do this, they had to, or I want to say it wasn't cast in bronze, the sphere, and then they were supposed to make bronze caps that go over it, but it was going to have a seam. In order to get the seam to fuse together, they would basically use an Archimedes death ray. And an Archimedes death ray is basically just this giant fucking magnifying glass that will concentrate light to just such a fixed point that it will burn. If you've ever seen internet videos, sometimes they'll cut through rock or brick with it. This guy will have a huge magnifying glass and he'll tilt it. Yeah, you don't put your hand in there. That'll burn right through you. It would burn so hot and they could concentrate this beam that they would do it on the bronze and it would essentially melt it to where then it would be smooth. So he had some experience working with bronze before, but he also knew that it kind of had to be done at the same time. So you couldn't dig a pit to do this because it would be so deep that it would hit the water table and you would essentially be stuck with a well. And if you were to have any water exposure to the hot bronze, you would get vapor explosions. You couldn't just take it up somewhere higher and do that because it was so heavy once it was going to be cast, and you had to have the smelting forges. I think there were 4 of them he planned to have right around where they were going to be doing it, so they could just crane up, and he designed a crane to lift up essentially the crucible.
Designed a crane.
To be able to pour that. And then you had to, of course, scrape all of the shit off the top. But in order to do this, the idea was, okay, I need to first make a clay model of this. He made the clay model to scale, which means he made a clay model of a 20-foot tall, however wide it was, horse, completely detailed as he wanted the statue to actually be, because the cast would then be made off of that clay mold.
Yeah.
Once the cast was made, what they said they would do is they would take wax. They would then fill the cast with wax. What they would then do is, once it was filled in, I think they filled it and tried to fill in a lot of the space inside. It wasn't going to be solid bronze. It was going to be a bronze kind of like shell, slightly hollow.
It would have been impossible to lift if it was solid.
I know. So they put like a bunch of like rocks and stuff like that in the middle to actually keep its form. Something in order to go ahead and keep the inside hollow to where the bronze wouldn't go in.
We talked about this during the big giant cannon episode during the Byzantine Empire, the ones that the Muslims
They had
used.
the one cannon
Yeah.
and everything like that. Yeah. So what would happen at that point is, once you got that formed and shaped, and I know I'm butchering this, but once you got that formed and shaped, you would then pour the bronze in. The bronze would replace the wax because of the heat. It would vaporize the wax. And then once that cooled, they would then remove all of the like stone filler and all of that stuff through the hole that would be kept where the rider was essentially going to be cast and then sat down. They weren't going to cast the rider at the same time. So the idea that he had, he's like, well, if we're going to do this, before discovering that you couldn't dig a hole deep enough, he's like, we're going to have to do it upside down to where all the legs are sticking up, and we're going to be basically using those as like venting chimneys while we actually cast this thing. He had it all ready to go as far as like the clay model, all of that. And then some war popped off or something was getting dicey in another area. And the Duke was like, so listen, all of that bronze that I've allocated for this statue, I'm going to need it for a cannon because we need to defend this other area. So I'm just going to take all the bronze over here. And the horse essentially during his lifetime never came to fruition. But I do believe one was built sometime in the 2000s or 2010s by a airline pilot in Pennsylvania. There was a foundation. He made the Da Vinci horse something or other, and they actually crafted one, and it actually is over, I want to say, in Milan. They sent it over there, and then they've made replicas since then.
Wild. How shitty is that to do all of that planning and all of that preparation, and then war kicks off, and it's like, we have to use all that bronze for cannons, actually.
And he's got it. And at that point, he's just like, okay, Is there a place you can put the clay model to where it's not going to get destroyed or wet or anything like that? Because after this happens, we'll get more bronze and then I'll be able to do this. I've spent so much I've dissected so many horses to figure out how these things work. I have to make this statue.
You know how many horses I had to fill with wax just to get to this point?
No shit. They don't like it.
No, they scream pretty bad. So yeah, just to know that all of that planning and all of that idea to go over to Milan to potentially get a shot to build this just big equestrian statue of bronze is just thwarted by war. That has to just burn you so bad.
So back in Florence.
Yeah, back in Florence, 1502, he serves under Cesare Borgia. Is that
Cesare Borgia?
Cesare? Excuse me, Cesare. I'm so sorry, Cesare.
Okay, we got to talk about the Caesar thing because we talked about this a little bit this week. So, Caesar Julius Caesar was such a big deal and despite being stabbed, the epitome of the leading man that all these other countries had their names and titles for their fucking top dog based off Caesar. So we already talked about it during the Peter the Great episode. Tsar from Caesar. Kaiser. That
Germany.
They used in and not the Ottoman, but the Weimar Republic? It wasn't Germany. What was it? Pre-World War I.
Yeah, wasn't it the Weimar Republic?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But Germany. So Kaiser. There was also, there was one more, wasn't there? That was based off of it.
It wouldn't have been Sultan.
No, it was another European one to some degree. But anyway, Cesare Borgia, the Borgia family, I cannot wait to fucking do an episode on these guys. This has got to be one of the darkest spots, and there have been some fucking dark spots on the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
But the reign of Pope Alexander the Sixth,
yes,
who was Cesare Borgia's father. So Pope Alexander is a Borgia. This guy had like 10 children out of wedlock and everything. Not only that, but then he legitimized all of his children and gave them positions, high fucking positions in the papacy. So Cesare Borgia was first a cardinal. He didn't like being a cardinal. So basically he's like, fine, you don't have to be a cardinal anymore. You can go lead the papal army. But basically and this dude was corrupt as both of them, Cesare and Pope Alexander. So the Borgias having all of this power, oh my God, I can't wait to do that episode. But Cesare Borgia basically has an eye for talent.
Yep.
And, knows about Leonardo and everything and is like, hey man, it's your lucky day. I'm going to give you the thing that you've always wanted. You're going to be my new war engineer. You're going to be you're going to be the engineer general or the general engineer. I'm making you a general in the papal army.
An artist, a painter.
And here's the thing, Leonardo jumped at it. It wasn't just like Cesare barges into a shop and he's like, you're going to start designing war machines. He had like written a letter and he's like, I can make you anything that can knock down any castle. I can make you catapults that are better than cannons. I can help you tunnel under your enemy without making any noise. I can design fortifications that can't be breached. I can do stuff that gives you an advantage on the sea. He basically is just like, I can do whatever.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's trying to get the job.
And at this point,
who knows?
Well, I mean, a lot of his stuff doesn't come to light because we don't know about all of his engineering and scientific discoveries until much, much later. But at this point, it's just like the painting dude. He's like, okay, why not? Go for it, man.
Yeah, technically, he could probably take credit for all the bronze cannons that the Sforzas were working on because he had that bronze earmarked for something else. So it could have been his project.
I was great at logistics. I was able to acquire so much bronze for them to make this cannon. It definitely didn't make a horse out of it. Fuckers.
No, one of another kind of crazy feather in his cap is he kind of starts to hone his skills as a cartographer during this point in time. He starts mapping out these towns in ways to where the drawings of these towns, you would literally, like, if If you saw them, you'd be like, why'd you draw that? I went up into a helicopter. I roughly sketched out everything, and the helicopter is just this perfect view straight down on top of the city.
How'd he do it?
By hand. By foot.
He had developed an odometer. Remember, we looked that up?
Yeah.
So it was a cart that he would just tow behind him, 2 wheels, had a gear on it that would then turn, I think, 2 other gears, and then laying down kind of in the, I guess you would consider it the wagon portion, like of the cart.
Like a well almost.
He would have another like disc or gear. How it was, and this is the best assessment that me and Adam can come to, is he would put a stone, there would be a stone pebble that would be put on this like top gear or whatever it was. And as that rotated around, once it got to a certain rotation point, that gear dropped or that rock dropped into a bin. And then another rock was dropped on there. So there was probably some feeding mechanism. But when that one came around, it dropped. The size of the gears determined how far the distance was. So it could have been every 6 feet a rock dropped, every 50 feet a rock dropped. We're not sure of the exact measurement, but he developed essentially accurately enough that I think when he was traveling, I can't remember if it was to Milan from Florence or where it was 130 miles away. He tested out this odometer and was accurate within 2 miles.
Jeez.
So mapping out a city with this odometer, all he's got to do is find out the width and lengths of the buildings, how far they're separated, how wide the streets are, and then he goes back into the lab and basically designs a insanely accurate bird's eye view of this city of Imola. And was this the thing that he showed to Cesare and he was like, oh shit, he's like, you're hired.
Yeah, pretty good proof of his abilities of engineering to be able to figure this out.
Think of it if you have like think of it like you're playing Call of Duty, you're playing Warzone or something, and you go to the map and it's top down like that. It's that view above the city showing all of the streets, intersections, everything, in each individual building.
He's got it looks like a park in here. I mean, he's mapped out everything.
But militarily, to have somebody that can do that and have those types of records to know exactly where everything is, that in itself is insanely valuable.
Especially if you're looking at trying to fortify or make a town defensible, if you know all of the potential weak spots that could be happening.
Yep.
I mean, it's invaluable to have. So yeah, if you're going to start a war machine, having maps drawn out this perfectly is a pretty good stretch to have. He also oversaw the construction of a dam, which is very surprising that he not only could figure out all this stuff, but then could understand the load bearing of the wall to be able to hold back this water behind this dam.
I don't understand hydrodynamics.
No, it's very, yeah.
Do yourself a favor. Smoke a little bit first, of course. Look up Da Vinci's hydrodynamic drawings. It's not just, and again, this is at a time where he's not watching a video of anything getting poured into water. He's taking water, he's pouring it into another surface and just watching what's going on.
Or he's literally watching waterfalls.
Or watching, there you go. Probably one of
Well, I mean, if you want to do it on a smaller scale.
Or a fountain or something. God damn, I can't believe I even came up with that thought. But anyway, the detail and the accuracy of the swirl and flow of falling water once it reaches under the surface, he was catching the swirls underneath it and probably dropping some stuff in and seeing which way it moved and everything. There were a couple laws, just kind of laws of nature, I think one of them was thermodynamics, that if you're pushing against the air has to be, and you're standing still, the air has to be pushing against you with the same force. And it's one of the reasons why he was able to design these concepts of flight. But he would look at birds and he would be like, okay, that bird is moving. It's no wind right now. The bird is having to flap its wings and move forward to go. But it's a little bit windy and that bird is staying in the same spot and it's not doing anything. It's getting the equal amount of lift and the wind pressure against it.
It's able to glide.
Yep. So he also understood from a hydrodynamic standpoint, if you have a stream flowing water and you put a stick down straight in it and the water's flowing over that has the same force as if you have a still body of water and you then move the stick through the water at the same speed that the creek was flowing. And he has all these drawings about he would stick different angles in like a flowing creek or flowing body of water to see how the water would flow over it, how it would curl and what it would do. So I think for him, because of his interest in engineering, because we're going to talk about like some bridges and stuff here in a second, but he looked at that and he's like, I have to stop water I have to learn how to redirect flow, and I have to design enough structural strength that can withstand the pressure of that. He's like, my dick is so fucking hard right now. He's like, point me at the river.
Yeah, it's just any challenge to take on where he just has to. It's the ultimate game of kind of almost creating a problem to figure out a solution. Because these weren't things that were running through people's heads. It's almost, he was just kind of creating questions to find answers to, because nobody at this point in time was looking at this and be like, hey, we need to figure out the dynamics of water and how hydropower works. Like, there's no reason for this.
He's got to be sitting there outside the fountain just staring at it, and someone is like, is that Leonardo da Vinci? And they're like, yeah. And they're like, what's he doing? He's like, I don't know, man. I've been here for 2 hours, and he's just staring into the fountain. And then all of a sudden, just more people are sitting there. It's like, is that Da Vinci? Is Da Vinci staring? Like, yeah, he's just fucking staring at the water. Finally, he stands up and looks at everyone. He's like, are you guys fucking seeing this? Are you catching what's going on here, man? And just walks away without saying anything else.
Yeah, he just doesn't even say anything. Everybody's just so focused on staring at what he's staring at, and then he just stands up and leaves like, what were we looking at?
Yeah.
What was he
Everyone
checking
just
out?
goes to the fountain and looks down. They're like, I don't get it. All right. So 1503, he ends up going back to his old stomping grounds, the Guild of Saint Luc, which you made a very funny point that part of the draw might have been the fact because they were partnered kind of with the medical doctors and everything as well. He's like, so is it weird if you guys get me like bodies or anything like that?
He found the fast pass to getting dead bodies.
They're like, what were you into in Milan? He's like, well, I mean, I got into some corpses, but it's hot there and like it takes him a little bit of time to get them to me. But I mean, you guys can get them like straight from the source, right?
Well, and I do, because I know that this probably had to have been around the time. We've done so many episodes around this time of like the Black Death and plague and all that kind of stuff.
It had happened because I want to say that during some phase in his life, he had come back to Florence or another city, and that city had lost 50% of its population to the Black Death.
So at that point in time, he probably had he was persona non grata to study bodies just in case they were carrying anything.
I would imagine he took a bit of a hiatus from that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, every good practitioner has to take a little time off. The Black Death was probably a pretty good time.
You got to know your limits.
Yeah. At that same time, 1503, towards the end of the year, he starts what may be the most important painting in all of artistic history, as he starts the sketch on Lisa del Giocondo that would become the model for the Mona Lisa. The Mona Lisa was a work that it's believed that Da Vinci just kind of couldn't quit. Like, there's even rumors that he actually worked on it up until his death. And basically, I think the only reason that it has been protected was eventually when they put the layer of lacquer over the top of it, they just couldn't do anything. Also, at the same time, it's a double-edged sword because lacquer, being clear at the time, over time will start to yellow. So that's almost what it gives kind of the
Patina,
yellowish
like,
drab look on the actual painting.
Like a patina?
Yeah.
Is that what would it be called?
But it's a crazy story.
The fact 20 years, right? Works on over the course of 20 years.
Yeah, he was said to have finished it in 1506, but he never actually gave it to the family, so he might have had a little bit of a connection to this painting.
I was going to say, like a love affair with the painting itself that he'd spent so much time with, and maybe that was his white whale. He's like, I feel like there's one thing that's off about this, and I've been looking for it the entire time, because there's also been talk that it in itself is an unfinished painting. Yeah. Not in the sense that it doesn't have color everywhere and everything, but again, he's this perfectionist going back over and having to shade something a little bit more or add a little bit of color to change this tone or whatnot. But as far as like, it's weird to think that the Mona Lisa is more attributed to Leonardo than the Last Supper is.
Yeah.
It's a private painting, commissioned painting. It's not a religious one or anything. Do you think, weirdly enough, part of that is, I mean, of course, Last Supper, if you're going to see it, they have to mention that Leonardo did it. But do you think they don't lean too much into that to try to give it more of the religious mystique by not trying to kind of like make it very prominently known that like Leonardo did this? Like, because Leonardo's gay and people are aware that he's gay. So, like, do you think there were like ever weird connotations to that between like the church of being like, we just won't really like make it well known that like Leonardo did this. Like it looks really good.
Yeah, because it's just always usually referred to as the Last Supper instead of just Da Vinci's Last Supper, where this is just always known as Da Vinci's Mona Lisa.
Yeah.
And there's other just famous paintings almost that get a little, I mean, American Gothic's huge. I honestly, off the top of my head, couldn't tell you if that was I don't think it was a Monet. I think it was the fellow that chopped his ear off.
Oh, shit. Van Gogh.
Yeah, I believe he did American Gothic. Other paintings, I'm sure in the art world, people just know who to attribute them to. But anybody around the world, if you ask the Mona Lisa, Da Vinci's going to be the one that painted it.
Yeah.
And I do think that maybe it's just because it's a work that everybody can kind of understand. Like the backstory behind the Last Supper is a very religious story.
Yeah.
Whereas the Mona Lisa is just like, this is a painting of a beautiful woman.
Yeah.
Everybody can get on board with a painting of a beautiful woman.
Yeah. It crosses all borders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It crossed a few borders itself because it was actually one of 3 paintings that he would take across, I believe it was the Alps when he went to France. Like he brought it with him. It was that, John the Baptist, and there was something else that he took, another Virgin painting that he took that's escaping me. But it was something that he never really gave up. It was said that he worked on it up until like 15, 17 when he started to suffer some paralysis from some strokes, or believed to have been strokes. But it was a 3/4 profile in front of this imaginary landscape. The oil paint really helps to show this depth and contour just within the face. And then the detail of the back.
If you look at the back, she's like, so what are you thinking for the background? He's like, I don't know. He's like, crazy thought. Like, I thought I'd draw you from 15,000 feet up. Like, how does that sound? She's like, excuse me? He's like, yeah, like way up in the sky. And that way I can get just everything, this big drop in the background.
Well, and it's like you talked about with some of the stuff that just kind of hides, that shows almost the depth of what this is. There is this very tiny bridge that you can see over her back left shoulder that if you're just looking at the picture and your peripheries aren't, you're just picking it up in the peripheries, the only way that you can really get a good focus and tell that it's a bridge is just by zoning in on that area. And if you look over her right shoulder, there's pathways that are leading in between these hillscapes down to this water. And everything, if you look at it just directly, it's very, very clear as to what it is.
Maybe but not 15,000 feet up, maybe like 1,000 feet up. I mean, high hilltop.
It could be either way because you don't have any really scale to go by anything else. But it's her hand articulation, her left hand, you can see the way that her knuckles form the curvature of her fingers. Like, is she wearing some type of like veil? That's her hair.
Okay, because it looks like she might be wearing a sheer veil as well.
Well, and if you see kind of right above her right eye, just over the top of her head, how there's that very distinct line.
Yeah.
That's actually from the piece of wood that it was done on that started to crack.
Oh, fuck.
So it dries out enough that the Mona Lisa, had it not been tended to in time, would have split. And this picture has
That's what I thought the veil was, and how it comes down the other side and kind of flows a little bit. I thought she was wearing just a very sheer, like, veil. But it's the crack.
The other thing about it is it's been the subject of so much kind of mystery and study, to where they've gone through, they've x-rayed this thing. They've put it under all sorts of different lights, taking different pictures of it with different cameras to almost pull apart the layers of what it is. And one of the reasons that it stands out from everything else is a typical painting would be a layer of like 10 to 15 different layers of paint. The Mona Lisa is actually believed to have 20 to 30 thin layers of paint. So it just shows the depth that he took to go through with just these light, thin layers to try to bring whatever light source in down there to show the shape of what's going on. He gives her just a touch of cleavage, just almost a classy touch of cleavage in this picture.
She's got a mystery. That's why she's got that coy little smile.
Well, and that's it too, because if you look off to the left or the right of the picture and you don't focus on just her, in your periphery, it almost looks like she smiles more as if you look directly onto her face. It's there's still a little something there, but if you let it go out of focus with your eyes, your peripheries pick it up in a different way to where it almost shapes it different. Like you were talking about with the perspective of looking at the Last Supper or looking at his paintings and seeing arms shorter and longer. It doesn't take that much, because as soon as it's out of your direct field of vision, it starts to change just a little bit, just enough. It's an absolute work of art. It was oil painting, so the full transparency that's going on inside of it. This, sfumato technique.
Sfumato.
It's all falling apart now as I say it. Just enhances all of Lisa's features. I mean, to look at her cheekbones in this, to look at the shading underneath her chin to where you can see it very clearly defined to where her neck starts the shade of her entire head. I mean, he takes so much time and so much detail that when you hear about it, it's like, okay, well, if he started this in 1503 and he's still working it up to it 1517 potentially, that's 14 years that he's gone through and just re-engineered this picture and used the light
just
source.
Increasing like the complexity of it and everything. He's like, I can make that a little bit more distinct. I can go ahead and blur that just a little bit more. You can obviously tell that we have stared at these paintings and tried to let them speak to us over the last week. Mona, she said some special things to us.
Well, and you can look at it 15 different times and pick out 15 different things. Just as we talk about the certain things, if you look at the ruffles in her sleeves, that's exactly what you were talking about, using that drapery technique to be able to look at just the folds of how something naturally lays. And it almost creates this 3D image where it looks like she's almost sitting in front of a painting, but at the same time, when you look at the painting becomes just as realistic.
Yeah.
It's an incredible...
It's painting inception, man.
It truly is. And during this whole entire time that he's working on it, 1504, he spends the next 2 years in Florence just designing and painting this thing that's called the Battle of Anglari. He's also designing this at the same time that Michelangelo is working on this companion piece called the Battle of Cassina. And this is the overlap of two of possibly the greatest artists of all time working kind of on separate pieces, but to be a part of the same display.
Very, very opposite just styles, not in, well, probably in the way they went about painting, but just even in lifestyle. Like if the, more flamboyant Renaissance man, everything, if that's Leonardo, the tortured, death, you are my bitch lover artist is Michelangelo. He's the one that wears just like simple black robes everywhere. He, he doesn't live a life of like any type of luxury or anything like that. He's all about the art, man. It's the art. And Leonardo's like, no, I'm just really good at all this fucking shit. And I just like living out loud.
Well, there are two different experiences where Da Vinci is, not been actively at war and fighting, but there's a lot of places that he's had to exit because of this kind of game of risk that's being played in Europe and in Italy at the time. Neither one of these would be completed. Both of them kind of made it to the sketch art cartoon stage, but the fact that Michelangelo...
storyboard stage.
Yeah, yep.
They storyboarded it.
Michelangelo and Da Vinci, two of the greatest artists of all time, both bailed on this project before it was completed. It's just incredible. Now we're to the time, 1508. Back in Milan when he's working on this plans for this equestrian monument that we were talking about. The Swiss, the Spanish, and the Venetian forces were like, we can't have the French in Milan anymore. We got to get these people out of here. He ends up sticking in Milan after it's kind of reclaimed, or not reclaimed because none of them are Italian. I guess the
Occupied
Venetians
by the
are.
French, basically.
Yeah. But he sticks around and he ends up not leaving back to go into Rome until 1513. So 5 years he spends kind of under this new management as far as still kind of just working with these people.
I think the French king really liked him though. I'm pretty sure he was one of those people that was like, I like that dude, just leave him be.
Yeah, and the French don't forget about him. He ends up leaving back to Rome in 1513, like we were just talking about, because the new Medici son went ahead and took over the papacy and becomes Leo X. So now he is working at the behest of the Pope. So back under this religious tilt for a few years, he ends up spending 3 years working under the papacy. 1516, he may have suffered kind of the first of these multiple strokes that starts to lead to what's believed to be this later partial paralysis, which I can't truly imagine anything worse for somebody that works with their hands and that is a painter and an artist than losing the function of...
Or someone that's done so much study on the movement of the human body and trying to understand what causes certain things. And
yeah, how do you explain that? You've done so much research looking at the muscular system and everything like that, the musculoskeletal system, that now it's just not working anymore. And you didn't run across anything that could have stopped this happening in these dead bodies, obviously, and some live.
It's happening like your hand isn't working, and all he's thinking, he's like, I wish this hand would work. So I could cut this hand open and figure out what's causing this.
Figure out what's going on. He would relocate to France. The king just basically sent for him and said, hey, you need to come over into France. This is actually the last time in him leaving to France that he knew he wasn't going to be headed back to Rome or Florence or anywhere in Italy. The king eagerly awaited his arrival. Once he arrives in France, his companion that's kind of traveled with him, he's been an apprentice, he's been a friend, he's been a lover, Melzi, actually draws one of the very few portraits that are known to exist of Leonardo. Like, he had his faithful companion finally kind of sketch him and draw him. By the age of 65, he most likely had become pretty paralytic in his right hand, which, again, he still draws with his left. He still writes with his left, so he doesn't lose a whole lot off of that. But again, it's the degradation of his body where it's like, why isn't this working anymore?
Yeah.
What am I supposed to be doing? Da Vinci would end up passing away May 2nd, 1519, likely from just one last stroke.
There's a famous painting. I'm trying to remember who did it, but it essentially, they say that the King of France was there, and he would come in and just basically kind of like take counsel with Da Vinci and just like talk to him and everything. Like, this guy's got to have some crazy fucking stories. So he's sitting there, and Da Vinci kind of sits up while he's there, and he's talking to the king, and then he kind of starts to get tired and starts laying his head back, and he's basically, that's when he's leaving. And there's a painting of the story is that the French king grabs the back of his head as it falls backwards and catches it and then gently lays him down on the bed. And so this painting is what kind of encapsulates that moment of the king laying down Leonardo on the bed. It's pretty cool.
I wonder how much truth is behind it. I wonder if
this is the kind of
artistic licensing of the French king.
I asked you. I can't remember. It was just a couple weeks ago during an episode, but how much of what you see in history is bullshit versus how much is actually fact.
Yeah, I got to imagine the French king wanted to be in that picture.
He misses catching his head, and everyone is just kind of like, and he's like, you saw me catch his head, right? And everyone's like, yeah. And he's like, just to make sure everyone knows, we're going to commission a painting and I'm going to be catching his head, right? And they're like, of course, Your Highness, yes.
Or even if he comes back into town and they're like, Da Vinci has died. And he's like, yeah, no, I was there, remember? Mm-hmm. Everybody knows that we're going to do a painting.
Me last.
Yep. Yeah, I actually told you that he died.
Yeah.
I'm sure you forgot this. Da Vinci recorded more than 13,000 pages of notes and drawings, which fused art and science together. These drawings that were in these notes included sketches of flying, as Chris was just talking about, sketches of flying machines, parachutes, war machines, bridges, studies of faces, emotions, animals, babies, plant studies, rocks, water water formations, rock formations, and dissections.
Okay, I gotta touch on a few of these things here. We're gonna start with geology.
Yeah, no, this is before we even get to the full board of codexes we get to go through.
Oh, is that on the codexes?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Yeah.
Some of this stuff is insane. Like, do you have like any of the flying machine stuff on this other one, or can I?
It's mentioned in those.
Okay.
So we can hit those quickly after this. Just sort of an overview before we kind of get into the deepness of this.
Well, one thing that I did want to point out, and this is just a fucking trip if you guys want to look at it. There's this thing called anamorphosis, and that's what we talked about, that a painting or something is supposed to be viewed correctly from a certain angle, or maybe even through like a pinhole focal point or something like that, or through another medium. There's this painting called The Ambassadors. Do yourself a favor, look this up. When you look at this painting, it is, I believe, two brothers standing, the detail on the shelves and the details of their like outfits. It's aside from their faces, it's pretty photorealistic. It looks very like just detailed. Do you see kind of down low in the middle? It looks like there's a weird, like stretched out something. It almost looks like a watermark or like a image someone put on there.
Yeah, a bit of a feather. It almost looks like an exposure in a picture.
Yeah, like it stretched the image out.
Yeah.
If you view that through a glass vial, it turns it into a skull of normal proportion. A perfectly drawn skull. Viewed through a glass vial. Just that part of the painting, holding a glass vial in front of you, will show you an anatomically correct, just regular, very detailed skull. And in the picture, it is indistinguishable of what this thing could probably be.
And it has no business anywhere in this
That
picture.
thing, that tripped me out for like 5 minutes last night looking at that. I'm like, this is fucking crazy. Wow. To be able to draw that and know that are you looking through the glass vial, and then like that's how you got to do it, right? You have to hold the glass vial in front of your eyes, you have to draw it out, and then when you stand back, you're like, oh my god, I drew like all over the fucking page, or I painted all over the page.
Yeah, either that or you draw it on holding the glass vial and then you pull it away. It's like, that's not at all what this looked like through this vial.
It's nuts. Do yourself a favor and look that up.
Holbein's The Ambassadors. Just like we talked about, Leonardo dissected well over 30 human bodies. He studied organs, he studied muscle groups, skeletal system, physiology, biomechanics, the circulatory systems, which absolutely blows me away. He has these parts in his writings where he talks about just the way that the circulatory system is so natural that when you look at the branches off of a tree and you look at the root systems, it's so similar to be able, as you were talking about, his belief was that the blood fed into the muscles and didn't circulate back through.
It was something about that, that belief that Vitruvius had about the connection between because we are a natural being, the combination or the shared type of structure between us and just these other natural organisms, or the way that the blood flows is like how a river feeds like a valley or something like that.
Yeah, it's just totally binding man and nature together. But surprisingly enough, he did a lot of work with dentistry too, which I guess he could do on live and dead people. It's probably a little easier to do on the dead. But
did he do as much as Peter the Great?
Probably not. He did more drawings than Peter probably did. Peter was more of a hands-on guy.
More dead people than Peter did.
Yeah. Yeah, well, Peter did it to a lot of live people. Sketches of Vitruvian Man, these pen and ink drawings of the fetus that are so eerily realistic that it makes you wonder exactly how he got them.
I would imagine. I actually did think about this because I'm sitting there staring at it. I'm like, he had to have seen this.
Yeah.
There's no way he draws this without having seen it. I mean, he could see an animal one and maybe just get lucky, but I mean, this is accurate. I think probably what happened is you would get people in accidents. You would get women that probably had complications during birth, early birth, shit like that, where they died. And is weird and is fucking morbid is say he's just like kind of we were discussing, if he had that ability to just be like, click, this is a machine. I'm just discovering how this machine makes another machine.
Let's put him in a full body guillotine.
Yep. And just dissects it. But I mean, if I'm going to say anything, this guy had no limits, nothing preventing his curiosity. He didn't he wasn't willing to do like heinous shit and being like, I'm going to murder a bunch of people to find out how people can be murdered. It was more so the fact that he could view something and say, I'm just doing something maybe useful with this.
Yeah.
Maybe something that I discover can help then prevent or help save people in the future. Because the more we know, the better prepared we are for shit.
He was able to, he had an iron constitution where he was able to just pull himself, any humanity out of it.
What? You gotta, is he doing this by himself? Does he have assistants? Like someone gets hired and he's like, okay, he walks him through the painting part. He's like, you're going to start painting, then you're going to start with sculpturing, then you're going to start with this. If you're still around after this, then I'm going to have you help me dissect the bodies. The guy's like, what? He's like, painting, sculptures, dead bodies. It's like, okay.
The apprentices just draw straws to figure out who has to do the bodies. I wonder how medical examiners look at Da Vinci. Because he kind of was like the early version of an ME, except for he's not trying to figure out causes of death. He's trying to map these things.
Probably the same way that doctors look at that, kind of what you were mentioning of being like, had we had this information widely available to us, because again, this stuff doesn't, these sketches and, are a fraction of the actual notes that he actually did.
Yeah.
The ones that survived. A lot of stuff he kind of kept up in the head, up in the old noodle. So that stuff, of course, is lost. And then, of course, you're going to have during his moves, places getting raided and destroyed. He's going to lose a bunch of stuff. But from just what we have, I think, that stuff was probably held by, I think Melzi held some of it. His estate held some of it. And this stuff didn't get dug into to really find out how. That's why I think people are just like, oh, he's an artist. Maybe he's an engineer. This stuff is not like talked about during his time while he's alive. This is stuff that was all discovered afterward and is like, oh, he was into some shit.
Just getting into these codexes, these codices, there's, I believe it's a 2-volume set of codices that are called the Codices of Madrid because they were just found in a library in Madrid, Spain. Like, that far away, somehow his writings had been taken and handled and ended up just in a library over there. There's shit that they found, I believe it was the Treatise of Painting, was just stored in the Vatican archives until it was uncovered. Like, just, they were found everywhere. He's got a lot of codices. The first codex is the Codex of Arundel. A nice thing that he did was a lot of this stuff he dated, so we kind of have ideas of like his daily life is almost like a diary of what he did.
What shit was he into at this point in his life? What phase was he in?
Yeah, but I mean, 1480 to 1518, this Codex of Arundel contains 283 pages that contain theories of mechanics and geometry that he had adapted over almost 40 years. So this isn't just like screenshots of what he was studying at the time. This is almost an evolution of what he was learning. The Codex of Atlanticus was written between 1478 and 1519. So again, even longer. It's 12 volumes. It's almost 1,200 pages. With contents that are covering flight, weaponry, musical instruments, mathematics, hydraulics, and astronomy. They contain designs for something that Chris sent me a picture of that I was like, holy shit. It's a giant crossbow.
So if you look at a picture of it, it actually, when you just pull it up, you're like, oh, it's a crossbow. And then your eyes take in the scale because there's a little guy standing off to the side of it. Basically, I'm not sure what of a ballista and a crossbow, they look pretty similar. I'm not sure if it's just the circumstances in which you use it. I should probably know this kind of stuff. But this thing is just a jacked up crossbow that I think was at the width of the actual like spring part of the crossbow was 60 feet wide. And you would this was supposed to be the end all be all of like siege weaponry or like defensive weaponry. It was completely enormous. And that has to be just a simple idea of watching him, seeing him see someone fire a crossbow and been like, you could just, you could make that thing so much bigger, right? Think of what you could fire with that thing.
1,000 times the size. But then, I mean, just based upon the scale alone of the picture, it's an impossible amount of draw that crossbow would have to pull that back, right?
You know, any Game of Thrones people out there, you know, they designed the giant ballista to take down the dragons. It's maybe, I don't know, 15 times that size. It's fucking enormous. Kind of touching on some of the things, I have it kind of parsed out here for warfare. So not only was there a giant crossbow, he designed this thing. I'm trying to think of how to describe it. It is, if anyone's seen the Hobbit movies, and there's the third one, the Battle of the Five Armies, how the dwarves have those chariots that just basically have blades off to the sides and shit like that. This was something that went on one horse, and it basically was like, I guess the best way to describe it is like a rickshaw, little carriage that you would tow behind the horse, but then you reversed one and you put one out in front of the horse. So you basically had this area on two rods on each side of the horse sticking out in front and then back. In the back, the one had wheels, and it had like a gear system in it, so it would actually turn like a crankshaft. That crankshaft went all the way to the front to where there was a giant wheel of spinning scythes that would be turned by the momentum generated from the wheels in the back. So, and also there's scythes on the wheels on the one on the back, just for its protection as well. But it looked like it looked like a human weed eater, is what it was.
Pretty much.
Basically, you just hold it out in front of you, and it was a human weed eater. But the way the drawing is done, the horse looks fucking terrified. The things look like it's going to chop off its legs. And I don't think it was actually ever built, but what a missed opportunity there.
We were talking about, what was it? It wasn't Cyrus that put the camels out in front of the horses? Or was it Cyrus? Yeah, it was Cyrus the Great.
Yeah.
In the Persian episode, how he was told to put the camels out in front to scare the other horses.
Yeah.
Like, if camels scare horses, big blades out in front of the horse chopping stuff down.
You'd have to start it off with a mini version as a small horse.
Yep.
And just, they would have to be specially bred horses. They're scythe horses, is basically the fearless, stupid scythe horses.
Shetland ponies with just switchblades attached to them.
Guy designed a tank. This was it was to be powered or pedaled by two people. It was four-wheeled, and basically it looked like a four-wheeled vehicle with like almost a shallow cone set onto the top of it.
What
And
it
then
looks
on the
like to
bottom,
me is a flying saucer.
that's exactly what it looks like. Just think kind of your traditional flying saucer. But in the break between essentially the bottom portion, which also kind of was like a plate with lip on it, so it kind of covered and they sealed together, kind of like a stir-fry pan.
Yes.
Yeah.
A wok.
Yeah, wok. In that seam, it was completely surrounded by cannons. It was just a ring of cannons. And so you would have the guys in there pedaling to move the thing forward, and then you would just have guys in there that would be running around firing off the cannons in this. They didn't build it during his time, but people like to look. There's some shows about reconstructing Da Vinci. They actually built one and they're like, oh shit, the only thing that had changed was a gear was like switched around. And so they switched around, the thing actually worked. And then they went back and they were like, well, I wonder if he had that purposely reversed. So if someone tried to build it, it didn't quite work correctly.
There is also the thought of all of the combustion inside the tank that probably would have just killed everybody on the inside.
Well, all the stuff coming out the barrels of all the smoke's coming out. I mean, the little bit that you're lighting it off, but
you're still getting heat and percussion.
You are. Speaking of that, he also designed an early form wheel lock musket. So before you actually had to go ahead and light the powder in the pan to fire it off, he designed it to where it had the little percussion cap that flipped backwards and hit the powder and would strike it to then light off.
Huh.
He designed a cannon that had 3 barrels on it to where you could just you would load it and line it up with the barrel, fire it, then you would rotate and put the other barrel down there. It would seal, you would fire it. So basically he designed a revolving howitzer.
Yeah. Was it a Tommy gun?
You're thinking Gatling gun. No,
Gatling gun, yes.
It was like rotating chambers.
But a similar...
Like a revolver. Revolver.
So the chambers were just rotating, not the barrels.
Correct, yes.
Gotcha.
He designed a concept of a diving suit. He designed this because he was talking about how if they could use diving suits, they could simply walk out into the harbor and drill through and sabotage enemy fleets.
I think this was when he was in Venice.
It might have been. So he would design it. You had to have essentially a pressurized suit. And so he designed this, I believe it was out of like pigskin, which would then be coated in fish oil to help go ahead and seal it. The helmet, I believe, was a cast helmet that had two like circular lenses on it. And then a tube would be attached. The tube was made of bamboo, and then it was jointed with pigskin or pig ligament or something like that to where it would seal, or intestines maybe, to where it would be flexible, up to a cork float that was up at the top. And of course, nothing's going to be around because the pig skin would deteriorate and everything, but they reconstructed this and found it did work down to certain depths before the pressure forced it to not be functional anymore.
Whoa. There's an episode of them building this?
I believe so.
Using it?
Or an article, yeah.
Yeah, I'm watching that tonight.
Are we getting to flight yet?
We're getting there.
Okay. Real quick, sorry, sticking on the warfare thing. He also designed the concept of a submarine.
Very cool.
I don't know if he actually designed himself, and I'm sure there were some other guys that had the concept of being like, we travel like over the water. What if we could travel like under the water? He had that thought, but he was like, I think I can probably design something that goes underwater. And so it was the same kind of principle of like a breathing tube that went up, but not each individual person, like a pressurized hole that you could sit in. And then he did a lot of advancements in like just mechanical principles, pulley, lever, cranks, gears. He was one of the first, I believe, to use like ball bearings in certain aspects of like the machinery, because he understood the friction that would occur and everything. But I think he also designed like a hydraulic cylinder as well.
Well, and it makes sense because, I mean, it's technically you don't need, as we learned in the Gold Rush episode, you don't need power for hydraulics. Yeah. It can be gravity-fed hydraulics. Yeah, just his ideas with these water wheels and his obsession with these Archimedean screws. I mean, I don't remember. We talked about that during the Alexandria episode, which would have been before this, and then during
think it was Babylon
episode.
That's how they fed the water up in, because it's the Archimedes screw, essentially, because it rotates in a certain direction, it will carry things upward. And that's how they would get the water up to the upper gardens for the Hanging Gardens of Babylon.
To reverse the gravity, yeah. Mm-hmm. We have the Codex of, this is, sorry, British listeners, Leicester, I believe.
That's how I'm seeing it.
Okay.
That sounds super British, but let's go with it.
Leicester, maybe. It was written probably between 1504 and 1508, so again, 4 years, but 72 pages. And this is when things really get fun. These observations and theories on astronomy, on the properties of water, like Chris was talking about earlier, just watching the way that a water would fall, properties of water as far as steam power and different things, rocks, fossils, which we're going to talk about a little heavy during here, the properties of air, and then celestial light. I'm sure that was like, hey, maybe I need to double check on these God guys to see if celestial light actually is something coming from God.
No, that was the celestial light was him figuring out that the moon didn't have its own glow or power source. It was simply the reflection of the moon, the sun rays. And that's how he was able to also determine like how the moon and the angle of the sun was able to hit the moon, but you wouldn't see the sunlight.
Yeah, that's right, because it does go on to talk about in that codex, the luminosity of the moon was speculation that the surface was covered by water, and that was what the reflection of the sun's light was. Now we got to circle back around to fossils.
I love
because fossils are very, very fun to talk about, because when we did the Darwin episode, this is something that he figured out so long before Darwin figured out. He would go into the mountains and they would find these seashells, or they would find these fossils that would just be belonging into the water. And this is before we learned about tectonic shift or anything like that. He went ahead and surmised that at some point in time, these areas where these fossils were found had to have been underwater and then pushed up.
He was able to determine, essentially based upon, because again, geology is one of his jams. He loves the erosion shit. He loves the formation of like rocks and stuff like that, like geological features. So he also would examine and see, like, when a hillside landslide happens, stuff like that, you can see the strata. The strata is essentially the different layers that have been formed over periods of time when different sediment has sit there, and then you get a different type of sediment because there's different water flow or different things like that in the area. So he's finding these fossils, but he's finding the same type of like fossils or very condensed similar ones within different strata, which means things being there for longer periods of time. When at that time, the explanation for why you would find possibly a seashell up on a mountain, if it wasn't, oh, someone just put it up there, it was, oh, well, that just got thrown up there during the Great Flood. That's when that stuff comes up there. And Leonardo's looking at this and he's saying, hold on a second. So the Great Flood total time was like 150 days before the waters were fully receded and all that stuff.
And it happened once.
And it happened one time. So you're telling me in that time frame that all of this stuff was placed in all of these different rock levels during a 150-day period when it takes thousands upon millions of years for these things to form. What actually probably happened is we're sitting on some type of shifting plates, and when those plates collide or move in a certain way, it can raise land above the current sea level, while that land was previously for maybe 1 million years under the sea, having different layers of sediment placed there and different creatures fossilized in there. When it gets pushed up, that's because of the shifting of the Earth's plates.
We were pretty big on Darwin during his episode. Still a fan. This might be a little bit of Darwin revisionism that didn't come up too much during the study for the Darwin episode.
He determined from an astrological perspective, he determined that the sun didn't rotate around the Earth, that it was I'm trying to think of like a sun-centric or I'm trying to think of the terminology for it, but it's essentially the now widely held belief that the sun itself is at the center and other stuff rotates around it. The round Earth rotates around it. So again, really controversial at the time because guess what? Earth is supposed to be the center of the universe and the center of all creation.
You guys at home are about to get a magic trick, and I'm just as excited about this as you are when I say this. Watch what happens to Chris here. The Codex of Leicester is also very big on bridge construction.
This guy liked building shit. And no challenge was too large, no challenge too small. I'll engineer the fuck out of that. So there's a story of when he was working with Borgia that the papal forces were moving. He's, of course, the engineer general. They come to like a 24-foot wide river, and there's no way to get across it. There's no crossing for miles and miles and miles. They have to figure out how to get the whole army across. And all they have is this stack of either logs or long planks. And no mortar, nothing to join together, anything like that, no rope. So Leonardo comes up and he's like, oh yeah, I can put this shit together. And look it up. There's like examples of it and everything. Basically, his understanding of like counter levers and the way things could be balanced. My mind automatically, you know that trick they do when you take a fork and you put two knives in it and one of them will actually like everything will balance on one. Uh-huh. I kind of like he just beautiful minds this type of shit in the same way of just kind of finding that out, because he basically just takes all of these things together, and as he layers them and kind of puts them, it looks like almost like a arched bridge, and made this thing strong enough for this entire army to get across. And when you look at the picture, you're just like, oh yeah, of course that fucking works.
His understanding... Would you call it understanding or would you just call it theories? I would say probably a little bit of both.
It has to be an understanding because he's not like guessing about this kind of stuff. He understands that there's certain forms things can take and certain, it's just a weird engineering mind.
Yeah.
They even bring him into, I think I'm not sure who's in charge of like Constantinople at this time.
Istanbul at this time.
It's Istanbul.
And it was the Ottomans.
Okay.
And I fucking love this. This might be my favorite thing.
So the Ottomans are like, hey, would you design us a bridge to go across the Golden Horn? And
the Bosphorus.
Yeah. So hearkening back. So it was at the mouth of the Bosphorus. Yep. So the Golden Horn, everyone go back if you haven't listened to the Constantinople episode, but basically where Istanbul is now, it kind of spans across it, but where Constantinople was, it was on this little area that, for defensive purposes, it was on this little area that jutted out that was covered on like three sides by the Golden Horn, which was a river that opened up and led into is that the Black Sea?
Yes.
And then the Bosphorus Straits on the other side. So there's this span, and this is where they had the infamous chain that would stretch across that would be able to close off the harbor. Game of Thrones style shit. So they're like, hey, can you build a bridge across this? He's like, I can bridge the shit out of that.
Not only can I build you a bridge, I can build it out of stone. I can rise this thing 43 meters above sea level, and it would be 240 meters long, and I am not going to use anything to attach these stones to each other.
Yep. And because the guy's scientific advisors in Istanbul, they're like, fucking impossible. This guy's high out of his fucking gourd, declined. And so they denied him doing this. Well, MIT ends up in 2019, to scale using only the things that he was planning on using, and his plans end up putting this thing together, and their stone cross sections, no mortar, just the simple way in which everything is placed and its weight was completely structurally sound.
It was structurally sound to withstand earthquakes. I think they said it was so structurally sound that it would take the earth spreading 50 feet apart before it would fail.
Yeah.
That was how far this could be.
Because each joint could probably go a little bit. Yeah.
Because it's just pressure relying on itself by the way that it was cut. After that, in 2000, in Norway, they actually decided to see if they could make this happen. The bridge was made out of laminated wood. It was reinforced with steel. They actually did it. It's used as a pedestrian and a bicycle bridge over a highway. The total length of this thing is 109 meters or 358 feet long. Its longest span is 40 meters or 130 feet just up over the top of the
when
roadway.
They built it, did they first build it to like without the steel reinforcements to be like, see, it works, and then they reinforced it to be like, okay, we're just going to make it safer because we can?
Well, it was partially an issue because of all the motorway.
They probably, it makes sense that they probably built it just as almost like an homage.
Yeah.
I mean, like, look,
Yeah, it's incredible that after so long, they're like, well, these people in Norway actually want to take a chance on making this happen.
Yeah.
So let's see if we can do it. And it actually worked. It was structurally strong enough and is structurally strong enough that it's still around. The man just did so much. And the fact that the leaders in Istanbul, the Ottomans, were like, no, dude, we're not going to take a chance on this.
no mortar.
Yeah, how is this all going to come together? So to continue on with our codexes, we have the Codex or the Codices of Madrid that were written from 1490 to 1499 and then 1503 to 1505. These two volumes contain 197 pages that include topics from mechanics, force, torque, and geometry. So we're talking about all of these different things that he's studied out of water, that he's studied. I mean, to figure out torque, you're going to have to figure that out in a way to try to propel something, right?
He basically beats Newton and Bernoulli to like some of their flagship principles.
So long before them. We have 116 books that he listed as far as like things that Da Vinci studied. So this was kind of like his bibliography that he put in.
His works cited.
Yeah, his works cited page that he put in. He also creates this wild spring device that I couldn't. Did you ever figure out what the usage of it was for? The pictures of it are absolutely incredible. We have the Codex on Flight of Birds. It's 18 folios. Don't know what the fuck a folio is. And it examines the flight behavior of birds. It determines that the center of gravity of a flying bird doesn't coincide with its center of pressure. So, in other words, the center of gravity, the mass of the bird, doesn't have anything to do with where the pressure on the bird or on the body is placed.
He's able to determine, because of the shape of a bird's wing, because the top of the wing is essentially curved, that generates the air moving over the top of the wing creates lower pressure than the air moving under the flatter surface underneath the wing or the concave surface. And that's what gives the bird lift. When he goes about designing his actual like flying machines, he designs them. And if you look at it, it basically looks like something Batman would use because of like the scalloped wings. And that's intentional because he was looking at this and saying, birds are using feathers. We're not able to use feathers on this. For us to try to generate these things, artificially, is going to be too heavy. This thing has to be light as possible. So he looked to bats, and he was like, they have a membrane that stretches across there, and that membrane is one solid piece and it's strong. So that's what we're actually going to need to do to our flying machine, is it'll have to be one solid piece. But because he didn't know any better, of saying, to himself, well, why did they have these concave, whatever you would call them, the scallops on their wings? They fly. I'm not going to fuck with it. If I'm using a membrane, I'm putting the scallops on the wings. So this thing looks like it's, a proto bat glider is basically what it was. At some point, he does actually construct this. He takes it up to the top of this mountain, and he has one of his assistants go ahead and attempt to fly this thing. Now, the problem with this is that, unlike the Wright brothers, he's not really going back to the lab after this instance to redefine it, because it goes pretty much like it does for the Wright brothers. The guy actually glides for a few meters.
It was like a kilometer, I think.
Oh, no, it wasn't. It was a few meters. It was, because if he went for a kilometer, they wouldn't have been able to catch him.
Well, it was just downhill.
I think it was just a few meters before, because also
did they catch it, or did he crash? I heard
crashed.
they crashed.
Yeah. So he got it, and I'm guessing, remember, the big issue with the Wright brothers was the thing didn't have any way to adjust it or steer. All it would take was a little bit of a wind popping up one of the wings, but assistant ends up crashing and breaking his leg, as well as breaking the flying machine.
You think when he was doing his dissections, he like filleted off some skin off of an arm and just started trying to stretch it like a bat wing? Or do you think that he knew that we couldn't turn humans into it?
Probably. He's like, someone walked in and they're like, why are these all? He's like, I had to use like canvas because I couldn't get a solid, large enough section of, human skin. I'd have to stitch it together. Air would get through. It was a whole thing. I tried, but it didn't work.
Why are you collecting all these skins? I want to make a human bat suit.
He designed a basically proto helicopter. It had almost a portion of an Archimedes screw on the top. It wasn't just like separate rotors. It was almost like kind of a little bit of a maybe 2-layer corkscrew. And they did end up constructing it, finding out that it would work, but it would have to be powered in a manner that he didn't have available. So it wasn't like a guy was able to sit there and like fucking jazzercise his way to get this thing to lift off, because it would need more force. But it had advantage over a helicopter once they were able to power it, because it didn't create as much like downdraft and kick up everything. But we already have helicopters. They're more practical than that. So yeah, that's why we still have normal helicopters and not Da Vinci helicopters.
We are going to put, if you're not already doing it, follow us on Instagram. We're going to put a lot of pictures of these sketches up just to kind of give you some understanding of what these things are, because as crazy as it sounds to explain and describe, once you see the pictures, it almost makes sense, but at the same time, it also makes it more confusing, because it's like, how did this dude come up with this stuff?
Yeah.
Talk about the parachutes.
Yeah, so he also designs a parachute, which to me that's kind of a chicken before the egg type thing. To me, I'd be like, okay, let's get up high enough to need a parachute first, but maybe he just thought that the flying machine was going to just work so well in the beginning that he was going to just automatically need parachutes. So he designs this, and instead of being shaped like your traditional either dome-shaped parachute a la World War II parajumpers, or more of the controllable ones that are more rectangular shaped but curved that people use nowadays, this was actually a 4-sided pyramid is what it was. And it had kind of like a light framing that kept it open, but they did do testing on it and found that it did work as a functional parachute. The issues with it were that because it had flat sides, that it sometimes would lose a little bit of the air when other wind was kind of buffeting against it. And it wasn't the best shape essentially for like not getting tossed around by the wind. But this is something that he designed while not having a practical way to actually test this thing, unless he had that same poor assistant get up to like the tallest like church steeple, and he's out there holding the end of it, and he's like, "Are you sure this is going to work, Leonardo?" He's like, "Absolutely."
That was how they figured out it wasn't going to work, was he put him in the glider. He's like, "I don't want to go up in the glider." He's like, no, we'll attach the parachute to you. He's like, the parachute didn't work either.
But the parachute had to keep its form. So basically in the glider, the parachute, that's probably what wrecked it, is the parachute caught the wind and just
dragged it right off. It's just so many different things that he does in these codices that, I mean, to come up with a parachute and to be able to understand like the curvatures of things and to look at a painting and then to build a parachute that's 4-sided. Like, you would think that he would have been able to look at the curvature of a wing and realize that something that's four-sided is not really going to work as a parachute.
Honestly, man, he probably ended up because, weirdly enough, he loved live animals. He would actually go and buy like live birds and everything like that were supposed to be like killed to be eaten, and he would release them. At one point, he bought like a whole flock of sheep and just like kept them to release them to keep them from being butchered. But I imagine at some point in his testing phases, he probably did have a bird wing.
Oh, yes.
And he just sat there on a ladder and just dropped it and found that it didn't catch the wind. So I'm sure he did a little bit of testing, and he probably also made itty bitty triangular pyramid parachutes and dropped them like little kids that have army men. He's like, oh shit. He's like, this one works pretty good. Yeah, use this one.
Not a bad idea. We have the Codex of Truvazela, which is definitely...
I'm taking a crack at this.
TRIUV.
Okay, here we go. Are those U's or V's?
First one's a U, second one's a V.
Okay. Truvalzanus?
Sounds good to me.
Codex T.
Yeah, and we don't got to go into it a lot because it's honestly just kind of like Da Vinci's own, like a look into him trying to improve himself, because this was just him trying to learn Latin. This was him going through and writing words in Latin and trying to create not trying to create, but trying to learn a language that wasn't presented to him earlier, and potentially to try to go out and spread his findings to the people that wanted to hear them.
Can you imagine trying to break the habit of writing, so not Latin, but backward mirror script for all of this stuff, and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, now I'm trying to learn this other language of how to write it. You have to not only then absorb the new language, but you then have to mirror it and then reverse. So you're having to learn so many aspects about it to use.
Yeah, I mean, it was 62 pages.
He probably did it in 2 weeks.
He gave it a college try, but I'm sure eventually he's like, I got some other shit I got to do. Latin's maybe not that important to me. The Codex of Windsor was 606 pages long. It was written basically throughout his entire kind of working period from 1478 to 1518. This was written entirely in this mirror script that we've been talking about. So entirely backwards from right to left. Just an absolute incredible amount of writing. 606 pages that are written in this mirror script. 153 pages on these anatomical drawings that show these autopsies that began right around 1505 that show these various stages of dissections.
Okay, I gotta know. What's your opinion on who was in charge of decoding this kind of stuff? Do you think this was a situation where someone came in and was just like, all right, your job is to learn backwards, mirrored. Well, actually, all they had to do was hold a mirror to it.
Yeah.
And then they could probably read whatever language it. But there was one guy that specialized in it, and someone asked him, so what do you do? All day, every day. I literally just go through Da Vinci's notes holding a mirror and have to decipher what it says.
It was probably a dyslexic guy.
Yeah.
Everybody else couldn't read it, and the guy walks up and he's like, what do you mean? It's written perfectly.
He just sits in a chair, and there's a giant mirror behind him. He just holds it a little bit above his head, and he's like, okay, interesting.
Perfect. This all makes sense. The various stages of dissections, I got to think, is it just like almost a flip book of like one incision, flaps opened up, next one, what's underneath the flaps, like just going through the stages of cutting into something?
I mean, dude, they're so detailed that this is what kind of like, it's so weird and kind of probably morbid to think about, but what throws me so much about the medical aspect of it is it's on a ticking clock, a very short ticking clock before stuff starts to swell and deteriorate. So he is having to get the bodies, get them in a position where he can then do the actual drawing because he has to prepare certain things or make certain adjustments to it, but then has to sit there and draw in full detail this. And then he's like, okay, how much time do I have left? What other thing can I do? And they're like, time's up on this one, boss.
You got a nose, man. We're not.
Yeah, we got a
Time is
sorry.
short.
I mean, like, you fucking worked on the nose for 2 weeks.
And finally, this last codice that he did, this last codex, was called the Treatise of Painting. It argued that painting was a science. I'm fully on board with the belief that painting is a science, just knowing the the ability to mix paints and to be able to layer them in a way to just be able to be translucent enough to shine light to give shadow to things.
You have to almost be a form of alchemist.
Yeah. Yes.
And I think
very
they do
much so.
consider Da Vinci because of that he was somewhat of an alchemist in being able to design that kind of stuff and stuff that you have to test it to make sure it lasts.
Yeah.
And put it through certain conditions of knowing when it dries and everything like that. Kind of thinking about it from a standpoint of like artists today that still do, not to this degree because there's more modern ways of doing things, but still people that are good artists. Fuck, man, like comic book artists and fucking people that have so much experience in knowing, again, you have to have disciplines in geometry, scale, know how things are structured, what reflective materials, what would sheen, it's like, yeah, it's a fucking science, man.
For sure. I don't even know if you can call it an argument, just because there is so much that goes into it and there's so much study. There's so much trying to replicate colors day in and day out and get the exact mixture right to get a light purple instead of a dark purple, anything like that. It's all scientific.
Knowing how light disperses.
Yes.
It's fucking nuts.
What your colors are going to be when they dry.
Yeah.
Just anything like that.
And that had to have been maybe some of the reason why he was so meticulous about stuff. He's like, I'm trying something new, and he paints it and he comes back and looks at it. He's like, that didn't dry the right color. I got to go back to the fucking lab and mix up this other color. And now not only that, but now I have to cover this color. So now I have to compensate for what I need to do as far as the shading goes. But a lot of this stuff was held or protected kind of in the early stages after Leonardo died by Melzi, who was essentially just kind of his life partner, kind of toward the end of his life, and his companion at that point, who basically handled, all of his affairs and things like that. Was left a bunch of stuff in his will as well. And, it's thanks to him that we have a lot of this information. But man, this fucking guy.
What a life.
There's a lot of stuff that takes away from our potential.
Yeah.
Like the dopamine hit, the distractions, so many different things that are very easy for us to do that give us that same rush and everything like that. But like at a time when just his curiosity about everything and how everything worked it's so crazy, because I think that was more of him. I think the painting thing, he had to have enjoyed it to a degree. He had to enjoy the technicality to a degree. But I feel like he wasn't being paid for any of this other stuff. I feel like he was so good at painting that he just lucked out to be so good that he could create a life for himself doing this thing that allowed him to do the stuff he actually was interested in and wanted to look into. He just used all that curiosity and that knowledge of all this other stuff to being like, oh, I can paint a lot better because I know all this other shit.
Well, the other thing too is we've talked about a lot of just revolutionary minds, and through as much research as I did, and I'm sure you did, I don't know if you ever came across like him traveling besides just in his general areas. He didn't go up into Flanders and start learning about oil-based paints. He wasn't he wasn't over in Asia. He didn't go and experience a lot of the things that they were doing to get the sort of, I guess, inspiration to think about a lot of this stuff. He was in his own kind of little world, and I could be very wrong about that. But like I said, we did a hell of a lot of studying. He never really showed up in the Middle East.
Word probably came back and everything, but most of that stuff percolated in his own mind.
Yeah. Everything was an invention of, he was creating problems to get answers.
Yeah.
And the mind is just something that, this guy extended it out in every which way possible. I don't think he had probably a pretty good jumper, but beyond that, he had a pretty good everything else.
He looked damn good while doing it.
Yep. Yeah, I wonder if he ever swung a golf club. Like, that's a weird thought to have if Da Vinci ever swung a golf club.
he couldn't. It's the same reason why like people won't get into golf now is because it completely consumes you, regardless if you're good at it or not. But he's the type of guy. Thank God he never picked up a golf club, or it wasn't around back then, because for a fact he would just sit there and be like, there is a optimal way that this club can be swung at an angle, and I can design a golf club that hits it this way and everything. Jesus Christ, he would have fucking smoked everybody.
Mona Lisa would have had one eye.
Out there in those pastels.
Yeah, he'd have looked good.
Oh, yeah.
He'd have created some great golf outfits for sure.
All right, man. You got anything else?
No, I think we covered Da Vinci pretty good. This was a lot of fun.
All right. Well, I hope you guys got a hefty takeaway from this podcast, because we've had you for 3 hours, and we enjoy you guys hanging around. So I guess we'll catch you next week.
Peace.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us for another episode. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe and like button. Follow us. If you didn't like what you heard, still hit that anyway, because we'll probably cover something in the future that you do like. Please follow us on our social media. Adam, hit them with it.
Our Instagram is historically high pod, historically high pod, and we are on Twitter at historically high. That's historically HI.
All right. And if you guys want to send in any feedback, suggestions, hit us up on those two, or you can even do it on Gmail. It's historicallyhighpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again.
Peace.